The lawyer's office falls silent. My mother Margaret smirks as she pockets the inheritance letter. My sister Vanessa won't make eye contact. And me, I'm staring at a single-dollar bill. $1. Earn your own. The lawyer reads from Grandpa Henry's will, his voice almost apologetic. The words hang in the air like a slap. My mother laughs. Actually laughs. Like it's the funniest thing she's heard all year. Vanessa gets $10 million and a penthouse. I get insulted in front of strangers. For 38 years, I thought my family abandoned me. I thought my father died broken. I thought my grandfather forgot about me. I was wrong about all of it. Because that's when the lawyer opens the sealed envelope. His hands are shaking. He reads something that makes him go pale. Then he looks directly at me and says, "Your grandfather left instructions that this remains sealed until you're present. Rachel, there's something else. Something your family has been hiding for 40 years. My mother's face goes white. She stands up so fast her chair falls backward. "No," she whispers. "That's not possible." But it is possible. And what's inside that envelope doesn't just expose a family secret. It unravels 40 years of lies, reveals a hidden fortune my mother thought she controlled, and proves that my grandfather spent 3 decades planning for this exact moment. This isn't just about money. This is about a woman who was written off, discarded, humiliated, discovering she inherited something far more valuable than cash. She inherited the truth. And the truth is about to destroy everything. My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 38 years old, and I haven't spoken to my mother in over a decade. I work as a freelance consultant from a modest apartment in Oakland, managing other people's projects, while my own life remains carefully compartmentalized, the way you organize a closet when you don't want anyone seeing what's really inside. But today, I'm walking into Alvarez & Associates Law Office on California Street in San Francisco, and everything I've spent 10 years building walls around is about to come crashing down. I didn't want to come. The phone call from attorney James Alvarez felt like an ambush disguised as formality. "Your grandfather Henry Morgan has passed." He'd said, his voice professional but tinged with something else, sympathy maybe, or anticipation. "The will reading is scheduled for Thursday at 2 o'clock. Your presence is requested." Requested. Not demanded, not pleaded for. Requested. As if I were a casual attendee at some networking event, rather than the estranged daughter of a family I'd spent years trying to forget. The glass doors of the law office feel heavier than they should as I push through them. The receptionist barely glances up before directing me to the third-floor conference room. My heart is doing something irregular in my chest, a combination of dread and something else I don't want to name. Nostalgia, maybe. Or fear. Definitely fear. The elevator ride up is too long and not nearly long enough. I catch my reflection in the polished steel doors and barely recognize myself. My dark hair is pulled back without effort. My clothes are practical jeans, a sweater I bought 3 years ago, canvas sneakers. Nothing like what I see when the elevator doors open and I walk into the conference room. My mother Margaret is already seated at the mahogany table, perched on a leather chair like she owns it. She probably helped pick it out. She's wearing a Chanel suit, I can tell from across the room, and her hair is styled in that expensive, deliberately casual way that actually costs more than most people's monthly rent. Her jewelry catches the light with the kind of gleam that only comes from genuine stones and no financial compromise. She doesn't look up when I enter, which somehow feels worse than if she'd stared. Next to her sits my younger sister Vanessa. We're 5 years apart, and it feels like 50. Vanessa has the same blonde hair as Margaret, the same sharp jawline, the same way of sitting like the world exists to accommodate her. She's wearing tailored pants and a silk blouse, and her nails are perfectly manicured, probably done this morning at some place in the marina where they know her by name. When she sees me, her expression flickers, guilt, discomfort, recognition of something she wishes she didn't know before settling into neutral politeness. She does look at me, at least. That's something. I take a seat at the opposite end of the table. The distance feels symbolic. Attorney Alvarez enters moments later, carrying a leather portfolio and an air of grave solemnity that makes me wonder what's actually inside that folder. He's maybe 65 with silver hair and the kind of face that's practiced sympathy, but means it. He sits at the head of the table between my family and me like a referee at a match nobody asked to watch. "Thank you all for coming." Alvarez begins opening the portfolio. Henry Morgan's estate is straightforward for the most part. The will is clear dated 3 years ago and witnessed properly. There shouldn't be any complications. He pauses, and I see something cross his face, a flicker of something that isn't straightforward at all. Let me read the primary bequests. He starts with the charitable donations. Henry was apparently generous with his wealth in ways I never knew. Millions to various foundations, scholarships, women's shelters. My mother's face shows nothing but her fingers tighten on the table. Alvarez continues. To my daughter, Margaret Morgan. I leave the family home in Pacific Heights, and the investment portfolio currently valued at approximately $3.2 million, held in trust with quarterly distributions for life. Margaret nods slightly, as if confirming something she already knew. To my granddaughter, Vanessa Morgan, I leave the commercial properties on Market Street and Valencia Street, totaling approximately $10 million in real estate, plus $500,000 in liquid inheritance. Vanessa's hand flies to her mouth. She looks shocked, delighted, guilty, a complicated mixture of emotions that I recognize because I'm trying very hard not to feel anything at all. Margaret reaches over and pats her daughter's hand, a gesture that somehow contains pride and possession all at once. Then Alvarez turns to a separate page. To my granddaughter, Rachel Morgan, I leave $1. He stops, looks up. His eyes meet mine. And the following note, which I'll read verbatim, earn your own. The silence in the room is absolute. My mother actually laughs, a sharp, bright sound like breaking glass. It's the laugh of someone who thinks this is confirmation of exactly what she'd always believed about me, what she'd always wanted me to believe about myself, that I was worth less, that I didn't belong in this family's hierarchy of wealth and significance, that I deserved to be dismissed, reduced, made small. Well, Margaret says, her voice dripping with false sympathy, I suppose Father had his opinions about independence. She exchanges a glance with Vanessa that's supposed to exclude me but doesn't. It reaches me just fine, sharp and clear as any weapon. I'm staring at the table, at the grain of the wood, at anything but the faces of the people who birthed and raised and abandoned me. $1. I want to leave. I want to stand up, walk out, pretend this moment doesn't matter. Pretend my own grandfather didn't just publicly announce in legal and witnessed fashion that I'm not worth anything. Not really. But then Alvarez clears his throat. He sets down the will page and reaches into the portfolio again, pulling out a cream-colored envelope with my name written on it in handwriting I don't recognize, but somehow feel I've known my whole life. There's one more thing, Alvarez says quietly. Your grandfather left specific instructions about this. He looks directly at me. Rachel, he stated that this envelope is to remain sealed until you are present in this room. Not before. Not without you. Only when you are here. My mother's body goes rigid. I watch it happen, the tension spreading through her shoulders, up her neck, into her jaw. She reaches forward slightly, then stops herself, as if remembering there are legal witnesses present. What is that? Margaret's voice has changed. The false sympathy is gone. Now there's something else underneath, something sharp and desperate and afraid. Alvarez doesn't answer her. He keeps his eyes on me. Rachel, he says. And I hear something in his voice that sounds like he's been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Your grandfather left instructions that I read this letter to you privately after the formal reading is complete. But first, I need you to understand something. Henry Morgan loved you very much, and he spent the last 30 years of his life preparing for a moment exactly like this one. He pauses, and his hands actually shake slightly as he holds the envelope. What's inside this envelope is going to change everything you thought you knew about your family. Everything. Are you ready? I open my mouth, but no words come out. Because I can see my mother's face now, and it's gone completely white. Her hands are shaking. She's staring at that envelope like it's a bomb, and maybe it is. Maybe my grandfather spent 30 years building a bomb and left it for me to detonate. Absolutely not, Margaret says, her voice sharp. She stands up so quickly her chair scrapes backward with a screech that echoes through the conference room. Alvarez, I don't know what kind of scheme my father— Mr. Alvarez corrects her quietly, and I'm following your father's explicit legal instructions. Rachel needs to hear this letter. Alone. That was his wish, and it's documented in the will. Margaret opens her mouth to argue, but she closes it again. Because she knows she can't. Because a will, once executed and witnessed, is essentially a dead man speaking through lawyers and legal documents, and you can't very well argue with the dead no matter how much you might want to. I realize I'm holding my breath. I release it slowly, and the air in the room seems to shift. Vanessa is looking at me now. Really looking at me with an expression I can't quite read. Is it concern? Is it fear? Is she wondering the same thing? I'm wondering, what did our grandfather know? What did he see in this family that he felt compelled to spend decades preparing for this exact moment? I'm ready, I hear myself say. My voice sounds like it's coming from very far away. Alvarez nods and he stands up. Mrs. Morgan, Ms. Vanessa, if you'll please wait in the reception area, I need to speak with Rachel privately. Margaret hesitates. For a moment, I think she's going to refuse. I think she's going to fight for whatever's in that envelope, whatever secret my grandfather thought was important enough to seal and hold and protect until this specific moment. But then something seems to collapse inside her shoulders, and she nods curtly to Vanessa. They leave. The door closes behind them with a soft click that feels impossibly loud in the sudden quiet. Alvarez and I are alone in the conference room. He's holding the envelope and he's looking at me with an expression that's a mix of pity and anticipation and something else. Something that feels like he's been holding this moment in his heart for a very long time, waiting for the right person to hand it to. Your grandfather's letter, he says slowly, sitting back down across from me, contains information that will answer questions you didn't even know to ask. Questions about your father, questions about your mother, questions about why your grandfather felt compelled to protect you by keeping you at a distance financially. And Rachel— He leans forward and his eyes are serious now, completely serious. There's more, much more. But the letter only addresses the beginning. After we read this, there are other things your grandfather left for you. Documents, locations, instructions. He opens the envelope carefully, reverently, like he's handling something sacred. He pulls out pages written in handwriting that's slightly shaky, but still deliberate, still clear. The handwriting of someone who knew they might not have much time left. Ready? Alvarez asks. I nod, even though I'm not ready. I don't think I could ever be ready for whatever comes next. Alvarez begins to read, and my entire life, everything I thought I knew, everything I'd believed about my family, everything I'd tried to forget, starts to unravel like thread from an old sweater. By the time he finishes reading the first page, I understand that my grandfather didn't give me $1 as an insult. He gave it to me as a key to unlock something my mother has spent her entire life trying to keep locked away. Alvarez's office is smaller than the conference room, more intimate, with a single window overlooking the bay. He closes the door quietly behind us and gestures for me to sit in the leather chair across from his desk. I notice his hands are still trembling slightly as he settles into his own seat. He's done this before, delivered bad news, complicated truths, life-altering revelations, but something about this moment clearly matters to him in a way that goes beyond his professional obligations. Your grandfather— Alvarez begins removing his glasses to clean them with a handkerchief he pulls from his drawer— asked me to read this to you first, to hear the words out loud from another voice before you read them yourself. He said it would matter somehow, that the sound of another person speaking truth would make it more real than words on a page. He puts his glasses back on and unfolds the letter, handling it with the same reverence a priest might handle scripture. The handwriting is beautiful, I notice immediately. Not shaky or elderly, but deliberate, strong. The handwriting of someone who chose every word carefully, who spent time composing what he needed to say. Alvarez begins reading, and my entire body goes still. My dearest Rachel, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I have spent 40 years wanting to tell you this story, but I was a coward. Not in the way your mother would say, not weak or incapable, but a coward nonetheless, because I chose silence when I should have chosen truth. I chose protection of the family over protection of you. And for that, I am deeply sorry. My throat constricts. I have never heard my grandfather apologize for anything. I barely remember my grandfather at all, really. Just fragments of memory. A man with kind eyes teaching me to fish at the lake cabin. A laugh that sounded genuine. A presence that felt safe. Alvarez continues reading, and the letter unfolds like a mystery box within a mystery box. Your father, Thomas, loved you more than he loved his own life. I need you to understand this, truly understand it, because your mother has spent your entire life suggesting the opposite. Your father did not abandon you. He did not choose depression over family. He chose you, Rachel. He chose you in the only way he knew how. My chest tightens. I haven't let myself think about my father in years. 23 years to be precise. Since I was 15 and he stopped existing as a presence in my life, and became instead a source of shame, a wound I covered with anger and distance. Your mother threatened him, Alvarez reads, and his voice becomes quieter, like he's giving me space to absorb the weight of this. She told him that if he ever exposed her financial activities, if he ever spoke to authorities or lawyers or anyone in a position to investigate her, she would tell the world that you were not biologically his daughter. She said she would take you from him. She said she would convince you that he was a terrible father, that he abandoned you, that he never wanted you. And your father believed her because your mother is a woman who follows through on her threats. I stand up. I can't help it. My body needs to move, needs to do something, because sitting still while hearing this is impossible. I walk to the window and look out at the bay, at the water that should be calming, but isn't, at the city that feels suddenly strange and hostile. Your father died. The letter continues, and Alvarez's voice follows me to the window. Not because he was weak, but because he was caught between two impossibilities. He could fight your mother and risk losing you, or he could stay silent and slowly die from the inside out. He chose the second option because he believed it was the only way to protect you. He was wrong, but his intentions, his love, were always for you. I turn around. How long did you know? I ask Alvarez, though the question feels inadequate for what I'm actually asking. How long have you known my father wasn't the villain I've constructed in my mind? How long have you known my mother was the architect of my pain? How long have you been holding this secret? Since I drafted the will, Alvarez says quietly. 3 years ago. Your grandfather made me promise not to tell you until after he died, until you heard it from his words, not from me. He said it would mean more coming from him even through death. I nod, but I don't really understand. I turn back to the window and listen as Alvarez continues reading. I could not stop your mother during my lifetime. My grandfather's words continue. To expose her legally would have destroyed the family structure you were living within, and I feared that would harm you more than protect you. So I built something instead. I built a plan, a hidden company, assets held separately, years of documentation, everything designed so that when you turned 38, when you had grown into a woman capable of understanding and acting independently, you would have the tools and the resources to choose your own path. Alvarez's voice becomes stronger now, more certain. The $1 is not an insult, Rachel. It is a signal. It is your grandfather telling you that the inheritance you are about to receive is not money. It is freedom. It is truth. And it is up to you what you do with it. There's a safety deposit box. Alvarez says, folding the letter. Your grandfather left it in your name. 3 items inside: a key, a video recording, and documentation that will explain everything. I leave Alvarez's office with the safety deposit box contents in a manila envelope that feels impossibly heavy for its size. The key, the video cassette, the folder marked, "For Rachel only," they weigh more than physical objects should. They weigh like destiny. They weigh like answers I'm not sure I'm prepared to receive. The drive from San Francisco to Lake Tahoe takes me through landscape I haven't seen in nearly 2 decades. I drive north on Highway 80, watching the terrain transform from urban to suburban to mountainous, watching the world become less crowded and more real. My hands grip the steering wheel tightly. I keep wanting to pull over to open the envelope to understand what my grandfather was trying to tell me, but something stops me. Some instinct says these revelations need to happen in the right place. They need to happen at the lake cabin. The cabin has been closed for years. I learned that from Alvarez, who mentioned it almost casually, as if it were obvious that a family as wealthy as mine would simply abandon a property rather than maintain it or sell it. The key Alvarez gave me is old-fashioned heavy, the kind of key that belongs to a different era. As I drive deeper into the Tahoe wilderness, I try to remember the last time I was here. I was maybe 10 years old. My father was alive. My mother smiled sometimes. My grandfather was teaching me to cast a fishing line, his weathered hands guiding mine, his voice patient and kind. I haven't let myself think about those moments in decades. The cabin sits exactly as I remember it, though smaller somehow the way childhood places always appear diminished when you return as an adult. It's nestled among pine trees overlooking the lake in the distance. The windows are dark. Sheets cover the furniture inside, visible through the glass. The deck where my grandfather taught me to fish is weathered but intact. I sit in my car for a long moment before getting out, steeling myself for whatever is waiting inside. The key works. The door opens. The air that rushes out smells like dust and pine, and something else, something like preserved time, like a room held in stasis for decades. I move through the cabin, turning on lights, opening windows, disturbing the careful silence my family apparently decided this place deserved. Sheets come off furniture. Dust rises and settles. The kitchen is exactly where I remember it. The living room has the same stone fireplace. And in the bedroom, tucked carefully on a shelf in the closet, is an old television and VCR combination that probably hasn't been used since the 1990s. I sit on the edge of the bed holding the safety deposit box envelope. My hands are shaking as I pull out the contents. The brass key is first smaller than I expected, tarnished with age, with the inscription Unit 7 engraved on its head. I turn it over in my palm, feeling its weight, trying to understand what Unit 7 is and why my grandfather thought it important enough to protect for 30 years. Below the key, I notice something I missed before. An address is engraved on the back of the key's handle, so small I almost didn't see it. An industrial park address, a street number, a location. My breath catches. This isn't random. This isn't my grandfather being sentimental. This is my grandfather being deliberate, being strategic, being methodical about every single detail. The video cassette comes next. It's labeled in my grandfather's handwriting, Henry, 1994, 1 year before final wishes. 1 year before he died, I realize. 1 year before he left this sealed envelope. 1 year before he set this entire chain of events in motion. I walk to the television, insert the cassette with fingers that feel clumsy and uncertain, and press play. The screen crackles to life. For a moment, there's nothing but static. Then the image clears and my grandfather appears on screen, sitting in the very living room I'm in right now. He looks smaller than I remember, older certainly, but his eyes are sharp and direct. He's wearing a cardigan over a white shirt. His hair is completely silver. He looks at the camera at me through me across the decades separating us and begins to speak. Rachel, if you're watching this, then I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this while I was alive. I'm sorry I was too much of a coward to speak truth when you were young enough to benefit from it. He pauses, seeming to gather strength. But I'm telling you now. I'm telling you through this recording, through that key, through everything I've hidden and protected for 30 years. Your mother is not the woman you think she is. Your father loved you more than you know. And I have spent 3 decades building something specifically so that when you turned 38, when you had become strong enough to understand and act independently, you would have the power to choose your own story. He moves closer to the camera, his aged face filling the screen. The key you're holding opens a storage unit. Inside that unit is everything you need to understand what your mother has done, what your family has hidden, and what belongs to you. It contains the Morgan Rebuild Company records. It contains evidence. It contains your inheritance, not the $1, but the real one. The one I've been building in secret for your entire life. My grandfather's voice becomes quieter, more urgent. Rachel, you're stronger than you know. Stronger than your mother ever was. Stronger than your father could be. This inheritance isn't about money. It's about truth. And truth, my granddaughter, is the most valuable inheritance anyone can receive. The video ends. The screen goes black. I sit in the silence of the cabin, holding the brass key, understanding that my grandfather has just reached across death itself to speak directly to me, to guide me, to show me that everything I thought I knew about my family was constructed on lies. When I turn the key over again in my hands, examining the engraved address more closely, I realize something that makes my entire body go cold. The address on the key isn't random. It's deliberate. It's specific. And it's somewhere my mother absolutely does not want me to go. I call Alvarez from the cabin before I even leave. My voice sounds strange to me, disembodied, like it's coming from someone else entirely. I tell him I found the key. I tell him I need to access Unit 7 immediately. There's an urgency in my voice that surprises both of us, a sense that whatever my grandfather hid in that storage unit has been waiting long enough, and the waiting itself has become unbearable. Alvarez meets me at the industrial park on day 3, early morning, before the city has fully woken up. The park is exactly the kind of place that disappears into urban landscape, unremarkable buildings, chain-link fencing, the kind of property that exists for practical purposes rather than aesthetic ones. Unit 7 sits between a storage facility and what appears to be an abandoned office building. The door is institutional gray. There are no windows. It looks like it could contain anything or nothing. It looks like a secret waiting to be opened. Alvarez watches as I insert the brass key into the lock. It turns smoothly, like it's been maintained, like someone has kept this lock functional, even though no one has opened this door in decades. The door swings inward and stale air rushes out, carrying the smell of old paper and dust and time. Inside the unit is larger than I expected. Metal filing cabinets line the walls, organized in neat rows. Maps are pinned to one wall. California topography marked with handwritten notations and colored pins. A desk sits in the center of the space, clean, except for a single leather journal placed precisely in the center as if waiting for someone to find it. And everywhere on shelves and boxes stacked carefully in the corners are property deeds, documents, legal papers, years and years of accumulated evidence. Your grandfather was very thorough, Alvarez says, quietly moving into the space with the reverence of someone entering a tomb. Very methodical. This wasn't done hastily. This was built intentionally, piece by piece, over decades. I begin photographing everything with my phone, creating timestamps, documenting the scene exactly as it exists in this moment. Alvarez watches, understanding what I'm doing. I'm creating a record. I'm establishing chain of custody. I'm preparing for a future where these documents might need to be presented as evidence. Neither of us says this out loud, but we both understand that we're not just exploring a storage unit. We're preparing for war. The property deeds are what strike me first. I pull them out carefully, laying them on the desk, and begin reviewing them with Alvarez's guidance. There are 53 commercial properties scattered across California. Office buildings in San Francisco, retail spaces in Oakland and Berkeley, industrial properties in Sacramento, land holdings in the Central Valley. Each deed is pristine, properly registered, meticulously documented with transfer dates and ownership information. Each one is titled to Morgan Rebuild, a company I've never heard of until 3 days ago. These are valued conservatively at approximately $150 million. Alvarez says, flipping through valuation documents with a forensic accountant's precision. And that's using property values from 5 years ago. Current market value could easily be 20 to 30% higher. $150 million. The number doesn't feel real. It's too large. It's abstract. It's the kind of wealth that exists in theory rather than in tangible reality. But here it is, documented in property deeds and tax records and ownership transfers. Here it is, hidden in a storage unit in an industrial park, invisible to my mother and my sister and everyone who thought they knew the Morgan family finances. I'm still processing this information, still trying to integrate the reality of this discovery into my understanding of my family when my phone rings. The caller ID shows Mom. My entire body tenses. How is this possible? How does Margaret know we were just here? We've been here maybe 30 minutes. We haven't told anyone. We haven't accessed any systems that would alert anyone to our presence. I answer the phone and immediately I hear the edge in my mother's voice, sharp, controlled, but underlying. That control is something else. Fear. Panic barely contained beneath a veneer of authority. "Rachel, where are you?" Margaret's voice is clipped, demanding. "I'm in Oakland," I say carefully, not confirming or denying anything specific. "Why?" "I need you to listen to me very carefully." Margaret's breathing sounds slightly elevated. "Whatever your grandfather left you, whatever he told you, you need to understand that accessing certain family assets without proper authorization could create serious complications." "What kind of complications?" I ask, even though I already know the answer. "Legal complications. Financial complications. I'm your mother, Rachel, and I'm telling you that some things are better left alone. Some family matters are better resolved privately within the family structure rather than—" She stops herself. I hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "Rather than what?" I press. "Rather than what, mother?" "Rather than involving authorities," she says, and now her voice is different. Now it's desperate. "Rachel, if authorities become involved, everything falls apart. Everything. Do you understand what I'm saying? Not just the company, not just the finances, everything. The entire family structure. Everything I've built. Everything you have. It all falls apart." She said, everything. Not Morgan Rebuild. Not the company. She said everything. And in that single word, I understand that my grandfather was right. There is more to this than just hidden real estate. There is more to this than just money my mother tried to control. There is something so significant, so foundational to my mother's power structure, that the mere threat of authorities discovering it terrifies her completely. "I need to go," I tell her quietly. "Rachel, wait." She starts, but I end the call. Alvarez is looking at me, his expression a mixture of concern and confirmation. He's been waiting for this moment, I realize. He's been waiting for Margaret to confirm exactly what he suspected, that there is something far larger than missing money at stake here. I turn back to the filing cabinets, and this time I'm not looking for property deeds. This time I'm looking for whatever made my grandfather spend 30 years protecting me. This time, I'm looking for the real truth. I wait until day 5 to call my mother back. I need those 2 days to process what I've discovered in Unit 7, to organize the documents, to understand the scope of what she's hidden. Alvarez helps me create a preliminary inventory of the property holdings. The deed transfers the financial records that suggest systematic management of assets my mother claimed to know nothing about. 2 days of preparation. 2 days of steeling myself for a conversation I know will change everything. When I dial her number on Friday morning, my heart is moving in a way that feels dangerous. I'm sitting in my apartment in Oakland, surrounded by photocopies of deeds and property valuations, and I'm about to have a conversation that will either confirm my suspicions or shatter them entirely. Margaret answers on the second ring like she's been waiting for my call, like she's been holding the phone, anticipating this moment. Rachel, she says my name like it's an accusation. I've been waiting to hear from you. I know, I say quietly. I wanted to take some time to understand what grandfather left me before we talked about it. And what exactly did he leave you? Her voice is controlled, but I can hear the undercurrent of something else beneath it. Something desperate. Something afraid. He left me answers, I say, and I keep my tone deliberately neutral, deliberately calm. This is a technique I learned years ago in my consulting work. When you want someone to reveal themselves, you don't argue. You listen. You let silence do the work. He left me documents. He left me questions. And now I'm trying to understand what they all mean. Margaret is quiet for a moment. I can hear her breathing on the other end of the line, slightly elevated, slightly rushed. When she speaks again, her voice has changed. It's softer now, more conciliatory, the voice she uses when she's trying to manipulate someone into compliance. Rachel, your grandfather was a complicated man. He had opinions about money, about business, about how family wealth should be managed. Sometimes those opinions led him to make decisions that weren't entirely rational. I'm sure whatever he left you seems significant, but I want you to understand the context. I want you to understand that I was protecting the family interests all these years. Protecting them how? I ask, and I keep my voice steady. Keep it open, keep it inviting her to explain. Keep it the way an interviewer would sound, neutral and curious and non-threatening. By managing the assets responsibly, Margaret says, and now I hear the defensive edge creeping back in. Your grandfather was generous to a fault. He would have given everything away to charity if someone hadn't stepped in and made sure the family maintained financial security. That someone was me. I managed those properties. I managed the investments. I made sure there was money for your education, for your independence, for what? I interrupt gently. What were you making sure there was money for? She hesitates. This is the moment where her prepared answer breaks down, where she has to think about what she's actually saying rather than reciting the narrative she's constructed. In that hesitation, I understand that she's lying. Not about everything, there might be truth mixed in there somewhere, but about the essential parts. About her motivations. About her actions. For the family, she finally says, but her voice sounds hollow now, like she doesn't even believe it herself. The family that you kept me away from, I ask. The family that you told my father I wasn't actually part of that family. The silence on the other end of the line is absolute. I've crossed a line. I've moved from neutral questioning to direct accusation, and Margaret now understands that I know more than she thought I knew. When she speaks again, her voice is completely different. It's sharp. It's angry. It's the voice of someone whose control is slipping and she's desperate to regain it. Your grandfather told you about that. About what I told your father. Her voice is bitter now, acidic. Of course he did. He was always so righteous about family loyalty, so judgmental about how I chose to manage things. Manage things, I repeat. Is that what you call threatening my father with claims that I wasn't his biological child? Is that what you call psychological manipulation management? You don't understand what it was like, Margaret says, and now her voice is breaking, slightly cracking under the weight of something she's been carrying for decades. You don't understand the pressure of maintaining a family business, of making sure everything stayed intact, of keeping people in line who didn't understand the necessity of... She stops herself, but it's too late. Of what? I press. The necessity of what, mother? Of control, she says, and the word hangs there between us, honest and devastating and completely true. Of keeping things contained. Of making sure that people didn't ask questions that would lead to complications. If your father had reported me, if he'd gone to authorities, everything would have fallen apart. Everything I'd built, everything I'd protected, everything the family depended on, it all would have been destroyed. So you threatened him, I say quietly. You threatened to take me away. You threatened to convince me he wasn't my father. You used me as a weapon to keep him silent. I did what I had to do, Margaret says, and her voice has hardened again, defensive, almost aggressive. And yes, I've managed the company finances. Yes, I've made decisions about the assets. Yes, I've received income from those properties. But everything I did for this family. Everything I did was necessary. I don't respond. I just let her words sit in the silence between us. Let them become increasingly desperate as she realizes that her justifications aren't working, that her rationalizations aren't landing. Rachel, if authorities become involved in any of this, Margaret says, and now her voice is practically pleading, if you go to lawyers or government agencies or anyone with authority, it won't just affect me. It will destroy the entire family structure. It will expose things that you don't want exposed. It will. I end the call. I don't say goodbye. I don't say anything. I simply disconnect, and then I immediately text Alvarez. I need a forensic accountant, someone you trust completely, someone who understands financial crimes. As soon as possible. This is bigger than we thought. His response comes within minutes, just a name and a single line beneath it. Caleb Chen. He's been waiting 20 years for this opportunity. I stare at those words, trying to understand what they mean. Waiting 20 years for what? What does Alvarez know that I don't? And why does the name Caleb Chen feel like it's the beginning of something I'm not prepared for? Caleb Chen arrives at my apartment on day 10 with a leather briefcase and an expression that suggests he's been waiting for this moment for longer than I can imagine. Alvarez had warned me about him during our phone conversation, had explained that Caleb had worked for the Morgan Foundation 15 years ago, that he'd discovered something that led to his termination, that he'd spent 2 decades watching from outside and waiting for validation that he hadn't been paranoid or mistaken. What Alvarez hadn't fully prepared me for was the intensity in Caleb's eyes when he shakes my hand. It's not anger exactly, though anger is certainly there. It's something closer to vindication. It's the look of someone who finally has proof of what he's always known to be true. Your mother fired me, he says without preamble, setting his briefcase on my kitchen table and snapping it open with decisive precision. 15 years ago, I was a junior forensic accountant working for Morgan Foundation, and I discovered that your sister had made unauthorized withdrawals from foundation accounts. $3 million. I reported it to your mother, who was CFO at the time. I gave her documentation. I gave her evidence. And 2 weeks later, I was terminated due to organizational restructuring. I gesture for him to sit, and he does, but he's vibrating with energy, with the kind of tension that comes from holding something in for far too long. He pulls out a folder and opens it, showing me employment records, email correspondence, the documentation of his termination. I knew it was retaliation. He continues, his voice steady, but carrying an undercurrent of something that might be pain or might be determination. I knew it, but I couldn't prove it. I couldn't sue because she covered her tracks well enough that my lawyer said I didn't have a case. So I spent 20 years watching the Morgan Foundation from outside, reading their financial disclosures, noticing patterns that didn't add up. I was convinced that what I'd discovered with your sister was just the tip of something much larger. But I had no way to prove it, until your grandfather left you Unit 7. He leans back in his chair, and now his expression shifts slightly. Now he looks at me not as an adversary or even as a client, but as something closer to a partner. Alvarez told me you were serious about this, that you wanted to understand what your mother had done, that you weren't going to let it go quietly. Is that true? Yes, I say, and the certainty in my voice surprises me. I am serious. I am absolutely, fundamentally serious about this. Good, Caleb says, and he pulls out his laptop. Because what I found in the preliminary review of your grandfather's documents is worse than I thought. Much worse. I need access to the full contents of Unit 7, and I need it immediately. And I need you to understand something before we proceed. This is going to get messy. Once we start pulling on these threads, once we start following the money trail, we're going to uncover things that your family probably didn't think would ever see daylight. Are you prepared for that? I think about my father. I think about the impossible situation my mother created for him. I think about my grandfather spending 30 years building a hidden company just to protect me. I think about all the years I believed I was worthless because my own family treated me like I was. I'm prepared, I tell him. Over the next 20 days, Caleb becomes a fixture in my apartment. He arrives early, leaves late, and spends the entire time hunched over documents, cross-referencing deeds, tracing money transfers, building spreadsheets that grow increasingly complex and increasingly damning. He works with a kind of methodical precision that's almost meditative. He doesn't rage or express outrage or perform anger. He just follows the money. He just documents what he finds. He just builds the case. On day 15, he calls me over to his laptop and shows me the shell companies. There are 12 of them, each incorporated in different states, each with different names, each connected to Margaret through layers of corporate structures designed to obscure ownership. On day 20, he shows me the offshore accounts: Singapore, Cayman Islands, Switzerland. Accounts that contain transfers totaling $50 million, all routed through the shell companies, all supposedly belonging to business ventures that don't actually exist. Your mother, Caleb explains, pointing at transaction records, has systematically transferred money from the Morgan Foundation into these shell companies. The shell companies then transfer the money offshore. The money sits in offshore accounts earning interest, and then it gets transferred back into legitimate business accounts or used to purchase properties in her name. It's a circle. She's been running this operation for at least 25 years. By day 25, I can see the scope of it. The unreported personal income, the foundation funds that disappeared, the properties purchased with money that should have belonged to charity, the systematic, deliberate, calculated theft that my mother justified as protecting family interests. There's $15 million in unreported personal income, Caleb says on day 28, printing out his preliminary report. There's $20 million in foundation funds that went nowhere documented. There's evidence of financial crimes spanning a quarter century. And Rachel? He looks at me seriously. There's enough here that if we present this to the right authorities, your mother is going to face federal charges. This isn't a civil matter. This is criminal. I understand, I say quietly. Do you? Caleb asks. Do you understand that once we do this, once we move forward, your family, as you know, it will cease to exist. Your mother will likely go to prison. Your sister will be implicated in at least some of this. Your family name will be dragged through media coverage and legal proceedings. There will be no going back from this. There will be no quiet family resolution. This is war, Rachel. And I need to know that you're going into this with your eyes completely open. I meet his gaze directly. My grandfather spent 30 years preparing for this. My father died because my mother created an impossible situation. I've spent my entire adult life believing I was worthless because my family treated me like garbage. I'm going into this with my eyes completely open, and I'm going to see it through to the end. Caleb nods slowly, and something in his expression shifts. It's respect. It's recognition of a kindred spirit. It's the beginning of an alliance. Then we do this right, he says. We document everything. We maintain chain of custody. We work with authorities rather than against them. We make sure that when this goes to trial, no defense lawyer can argue that we obtained evidence improperly or that we planted anything. We build a case so airtight that your mother has no choice but to accept the consequences of what she's done. Agreed, I say. On day 30, Caleb calls me in the morning and his voice is different. It's urgent. It's strained. It's carrying something that sounds almost like excitement mixed with dread. Rachel, I found something, he says without greeting. I found something in your grandfather's personal files. Something about your father. The autopsy report, Rachel. I found the autopsy report. I drive to Caleb's office in downtown Oakland immediately after his call. The drive feels both too long and too short. My hands grip the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turn white. I've spent 23 years not thinking about my father's death. I've spent 23 years accepting the narrative that he was weak, that he chose to leave us, that his suicide was a personal failing rather than a family tragedy. I've built walls around that particular grief so thoroughly that I've almost forgotten how to access it. But now, with Caleb's urgent voice still echoing in my ears, those walls are beginning to crack. Caleb's office is small but meticulously organized. He's waiting for me, and he's pulled up an email on his computer screen. The email is from someone named Margaret Reeves, daughter of Dr. Robert Reeves, the coroner who performed my father's autopsy 40 years ago. The email is dated 3 days ago, sent in response to Caleb's message requesting any documents related to Thomas Morgan's death investigation. The attachment is labeled simply, Dad's Records, Tom Morgan Autopsy. Read it, Caleb says quietly, gesturing to his computer. Read it all the way through before we discuss it. I pull up a chair and begin reading. Dr. Reeves' handwriting is careful, precise, the handwriting of a professional documenting findings. The date on the report is March 15, 1983. My father was found in his bedroom. Empty bottles of sleeping medication were discovered on his nightstand. An empty bottle of gin was found beside him. The autopsy revealed mixed drug toxicology sleeping pills, alcohol and antihistamines in combination that created a lethal interaction. But then I read the notes, the crucial, devastating notes that Dr. Reeves apparently felt compelled to document but not initially report. Toxicology report indicates subject consumed combination of pharmaceuticals and alcohol, Dr. Reeves had written. While police have determined death as suicide based on circumstantial evidence, toxicology findings are also consistent with accidental overdose. Subject may have been unaware of interaction effects between sleeping medication, over-the-counter antihistamine, and significant alcohol consumption. Interaction between these substances can cause severe respiratory depression and sudden cardiac arrest. Determination of intent cannot be made with absolute certainty based on available evidence. Recommend further investigation, but police have indicated investigation is closed per family request. The words blur slightly as I read them. Accidental overdose. Intent cannot be determined. Family request for investigation closure. I sit back in the chair and my breathing becomes shallow. I've known my entire adult life that my father committed suicide. I've made peace with that knowledge, or I thought I had. I've integrated it into my understanding of my family as a place where people gave up, where people failed, where people left. But this report is suggesting something different. This report is suggesting that my father might not have deliberately taken his own life. He might have simply mixed medications without understanding the consequences. He might have been a depressed man taking medication to sleep, drinking alcohol to cope, taking over-the-counter medicine for allergies or cold symptoms, and accidentally created a fatal combination without understanding what he was doing. The email from Dr. Reeves's daughter explains the situation, Caleb says gently. Her father died 2 years ago. He kept detailed notes about cases throughout his career. He apparently felt that the Morgan case was handled improperly, that the investigation was closed too quickly, that the family pressured police to accept suicide determination without further investigation. He left instructions with his daughter to send this report to you upon your 38th birthday contingent on certain conditions being met. Your grandfather apparently contacted Dr. Reeves decades ago and arranged for this information to be delivered to you at the appropriate time. I look at the date on the email again. It arrived 3 days ago, on my 38th birthday. So, my grandfather, I say slowly, my voice sounding strange to me, arranged for this report to reach me. He planned this. He knew I would be 38. He knew I would be ready to hear this. Yes, Caleb confirms. Your grandfather was extraordinarily thorough in his planning. I sit with the implications of this for a long moment. My father's death wasn't simple. It wasn't straightforward abandonment or deliberate choice. It was complicated and ambiguous and tragic in a way that's almost worse because it's uncertain. Was he trying to die? Did he accidentally die? Does the distinction even matter when the result is the same? What matters, I say quietly, thinking through this for the first time, is that my mother created the conditions. Whether my father deliberately took his own life or accidentally overdosed my mother's threats about my paternity, her psychological manipulation, her demands for his silence about her fraud. That's what created the desperation. That's what made him reach for pills and alcohol in the first place. Exactly, Caleb says. Your mother didn't hold a gun to his head, but she created a psychological situation so impossible that he saw no other way out. And then she spent 40 years telling you that he was weak, that he abandoned you, that he didn't want you. She used his death as a weapon against you. I realize I'm crying. Not dramatically, not with the kind of emotional release that comes from finally processing grief. But quietly, steadily, the tears of someone confronting truth that she's been avoiding for her entire adult life. My father loved me. My father was trapped in an impossible situation created by my mother's manipulation. My father died, whether deliberately or accidentally, because he couldn't find a way to be honest and keep me at the same time. I pull out my phone and navigate to my messages with Vanessa. We haven't spoken in 5 years. The last conversation we had was hostile and painful. But now I understand that Vanessa has been trapped by our mother just like I was trapped, just like my father was trapped. And maybe it's time to find out whether my sister is ready to know the truth. I type, Vanessa, we need to talk. Not about Mom, about Dad, and about what Mom made him do. I hit send before I can overthink it, before I can talk myself out of reaching across the years of distance and anger and family dysfunction to my sister. Because if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to unravel what my mother has hidden, if I'm going to pursue truth even when it's devastating, then I can't do it alone. And my sister deserves to know the truth about our father just as much as I do. Vanessa responds to my text within an hour. Her message is brief. Coffee tomorrow alone. There's a vulnerability in those 3 words that I haven't heard from my sister in years. She agrees to meet at a small cafe in Berkeley, neutral territory, away from Margaret's influence and our family's history. I spend the night before our meeting trying to anticipate what she might say, trying to prepare myself for the possibility that she might refuse to help me, might choose loyalty to our mother over truth. But something in her response suggests she's been waiting for someone to give her permission to break free. Day 65 arrives gray and cold. I'm sitting at a corner table in the cafe when Vanessa walks in, and I barely recognize her. She looks exhausted. She looks haunted. She looks like someone carrying a weight so heavy that it's physically bending her spine. She's wearing sunglasses indoors, and I understand immediately that she's been crying. She sits across from me without speaking, and for a long moment we just look at each other. 2 women who share a father, who share a childhood trauma, who share a mother but have processed her entirely differently. Mom knows we're talking, Vanessa says, finally removing her sunglasses to reveal red-rimmed eyes. She called me 3 days ago. She said she knew you were going to try to turn me against her. She said if I cooperated with you in any way, if I provided you with any information about family business, she would make sure I paid for it. How would she make you pay? I ask, keeping my voice calm, keeping it gentle, even though anger is surging through me at the thought of my mother threatening my sister the same way she threatened our father. She said she'd expose me as being complicit in financial crimes, Vanessa says, and her voice is shaking slightly. She said that $3 million withdrawal I made from the foundation years ago, she said she'd claim I made it without authorization, that I'm the criminal, not her. She said my only protection is her silence, and her silence depends on my loyalty. I listen to this and I recognize the manipulation so clearly that it's almost obscene. I recognize it because it's the same manipulation she used on my father. Create an impossible situation, give someone only 2 choices, both of them bad. Force them into complicity, or lose everything. Vanessa, I say carefully, I need you to understand something. Your mother isn't protecting you with her silence. She's preparing to sacrifice you. Vanessa's head snaps up. What do you mean? I mean that if an investigation happens and Caleb and I are making sure of that, your mother won't hesitate to present you as the architect of that $3 million withdrawal. She'll say you acted without her knowledge, that you duped her, that you're the criminal and she's the victim. She'll sacrifice you to save herself. That's who she is. That's what she does. I watch this realization wash over my sister's face. I watch her understand that the protection she thought she had is actually a trap. I watch her process the reality that our mother has never protected either of us. She's only ever used us as shields and scapegoats depending on what served her purposes in any given moment. She's been planning this the whole time, Vanessa whispers. She's been planning to blame me. Yes, I confirm. Which is why you need to make a choice right now. You can continue protecting her, and when this goes public, she'll throw you under the bus without hesitation. Or you can tell me the truth, and we can make sure that you're protected by transparency rather than betrayed by loyalty. Vanessa is quiet for a long time. She stares at her coffee untouched and cooling on the table between us. When she finally speaks, her voice is barely audible. "There's something Mom gave me," she says slowly. "Years ago. She said to keep it safe, that it was valuable family documentation. She said if anything ever happened to her, I needed to protect it. I kept it encrypted, locked away. I never looked at what was inside because I didn't want to know. I didn't want to have to make choices about what I knew. But I think..." She stops, swallows hard. "I think you need to see what's in there." She reaches into her purse and pulls out a small USB drive, the kind that can hold years of digital documentation. She sets it on the table between us like she's handling something dangerous, something that could explode if she's not careful. "This is everything Mom wanted to keep hidden," Vanessa says. "This is her insurance policy. This is her proof that she's covered her tracks. But it's also..." She looks up at me, and her eyes are wet again. "It's also proof of what she did. Proof of the money laundering the shell companies, the offshore accounts. And there's more. There's emails. From 1999. Mom was trying to forge Grandpa Henry's will. She tried to change it so she inherited more. A notary refused. There's documentation of the bribe attempt. There's everything." I reach across the table, slowly giving Vanessa time to pull back if she wants to. She doesn't pull back. She lets me take the USB drive. She lets me take this step that we both understand will change everything. "Thank you," I say quietly. "I'm terrified," Vanessa admits. "I'm terrified of what happens next. I'm terrified of losing my mother, even though I'm beginning to understand that the mother I thought I had was never real. I'm terrified of going to trial, of being questioned, of having my life become public and exposed." "I know," I say. "I'm terrified too. But I'm more terrified," Vanessa continues, "of spending the rest of my life protecting someone who would destroy me without hesitation. I'm more terrified of teaching myself that betrayal is acceptable if it comes from family. I'm more terrified of becoming her." I reach across the table and take my sister's hand. It's the first time we've touched in 5 years, and the sensation is both foreign and deeply familiar. She's my sister. We share DNA and history and trauma. We share a father who loved us even though it cost him everything. "Vanessa," I say, looking directly into her eyes, "what you're about to do will cost you, but it's also the only way you're going to be free." The phone call comes on day 83, and I know immediately that something has shifted in my mother's understanding of the situation. Her voice is different than it was during our previous conversation. It's softer, almost conciliatory, carrying an undertone of something that might be desperation masked as civility. "Rachel, I think we should talk," Margaret says without preamble. "Really talk, not over the phone, face to face. I'd like to meet you at the lake cabin, this weekend. Just the two of us." I know this is a trap of some kind. I know that my mother is trying to manage the situation, trying to control the narrative before it spirals completely out of her hands. But I also know that I need to hear what she has to say. I need to understand her perspective, not because I believe she's telling the truth, but because understanding how she justifies herself might be important later. "Okay," I tell her. "Saturday, 3 o'clock. 3. After I end the call, I immediately contact Alvarez. I explain that Margaret wants to meet me at the cabin, that I want to record the conversation, that I need to understand what legal protections exist for doing so. California is a one-party consent state, Alvarez explains over the phone. That means you can legally record a conversation you're part of without the other person's knowledge. The recording will be admissible as evidence. However, Rachel, I need to caution you about something. Recording your mother without her knowledge is a significant step. It's a step that once taken can't be undone. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want to do? I think about my father. I think about the impossible situation my mother created for him. I think about 23 years of believing I was worthless because my own family treated me like garbage. I'm certain, I tell him. Saturday arrives cold and clear. The lake cabin feels different now than it did on my first visit. Now it feels like a place where truth is about to be confronted, where secrets are about to be exposed, where a family's carefully constructed lies are about to collapse under the weight of reality. I arrive at 2:30, giving myself 30 minutes to prepare. I activate the voice recorder app on my phone and place the phone on the coffee table in the living room, angled in a way that will capture audio clearly. Then I sit in one of the leather chairs and wait. Margaret arrives at 3 o'clock exactly. She's wearing a long cashmere coat and pearls, dressed for a business meeting rather than a family conversation. She looks tired, I notice. Not physically tired, but tired in a way that suggests years of carrying heavy secrets have finally caught up with her. She settles into the chair across from me, and for a moment, we just look at each other. Mother and daughter, separated not just by physical space, but by years of hurt and manipulation and lies. Thank you for coming, Margaret says, and her voice has a quality I haven't heard from her in decades. It's almost vulnerable, almost human. Why did you want to meet? I ask, keeping my tone neutral, keeping it the way an interviewer would sound, curious but not accusatory. Margaret takes a long breath. Because I need you to understand something about your father. About why things happened the way they did. About why I made the choices I made. Go ahead, I say, and I'm amazed at how calm my voice sounds when everything inside me is vibrating with tension. What follows is a confession of sorts, though not the kind that brings redemption. Margaret talks about her marriage to my father. She talks about how she felt he was weak, that he didn't understand the necessity of financial control, that his desire to be honest about her activities threatened everything she'd built. She talks about how she used the threat of denying him access to me as a way to keep him compliant, to keep him silent. And when I ask her directly about his death, she breaks down. I don't know if he killed himself, or if it was an accident. Margaret says, her voice cracking slightly. I don't know. All I know is that he couldn't live with the situation I created. He couldn't live with being forced to choose between protecting you and protecting truth. And that... She stops, composes herself. That should have been a wake-up call for me. That should have made me understand what I was doing. But instead, I just told everyone he was weak. I told everyone he abandoned you. I made sure that your entire understanding of your father was poisoned by my narrative. I sit with this confession, understanding that my mother is finally being honest about something, even if she's not being honest about everything. Even if she's still not fully acknowledging the scope of her crimes or the systemic nature of her fraud. After the meeting ends, I sit in my car for a long time before driving back to Oakland. I don't replay the recording. I don't listen to my mother's confession. I just sit in the silence and process what I've learned. I've heard my mother admit that she destroyed my father. I've heard her acknowledge that her actions created the conditions for his death. And I've recorded it all. That evening, I meet with Alvarez and Caleb at my apartment. I play them the recording. They listen in silence, understanding the power of what they're hearing, understanding that this recording could devastate my mother in court. When it ends, Caleb looks at me with something like awe. "This is enough," he says quietly. "This is everything we need." "I know," I reply, "but we're not going to use it." Both men stare at me like I've just spoken in a language they don't understand. "We have the offshore accounts," I explain. We have the shell companies, we have Vanessa's testimony, we have the encrypted drive with documentation of the bribe attempt. We have Caleb's forensic accounting work showing systematic embezzlement. We have everything we need to prove what my mother did. Using this recording would just be cruel. It would be using her own pain and admission against her in a way that goes beyond justice and into vindictiveness. And I won't do that. I won't become like her. Alvarez nods slowly, understanding what I'm saying. Caleb takes longer, but eventually he nods too. Then we move forward with what we have, Alvarez says. We prepare everything for the IRS. We present our case through legal channels. We let the evidence speak for itself. Tomorrow, I tell them both. Tomorrow, we go to the IRS. It's time for the authorities to take over. The federal building in San Francisco is imposing in a way that makes me acutely aware of my own smallness. Glass and steel and the weight of government authority pressing down from above. Caleb and I arrive at 9 a.m. on day 90, both of us carrying folders containing years of documentation that my grandfather carefully preserved and organized. We're here to meet with IRS Special Agent Marcus Torres, a man Alvarez recommended based on his reputation for handling complex financial crime cases with precision and discretion. Agent Torres is younger than I expected, maybe mid-50s, with the kind of focused intensity that comes from spending a career following money trails through corporate labyrinths. He greets us formally but not coldly, gesturing for us to sit at a table in a conference room that overlooks the bay. I can see the water from here, and I find myself thinking about my grandfather, about how he must have sat in rooms like this during his own legal dealings, planning and strategizing and building the foundation for my future. I appreciate you coming in, Torres says, settling into his chair. Mr. Alvarez indicated that you have significant documentation regarding potential federal financial crimes. I want to understand your process, your methodology, and your confidence level in your findings before we proceed. Caleb takes the lead, and I watch him transform into the professional I've come to know over the past month. He's methodical and precise, walking Torres through his forensic accounting process. He explains how he cross-referenced property deeds with ownership records, how he traced money movements through shell companies, how he identified patterns of systematic transfer designed to obscure origins and destinations. He presents spreadsheets showing the flow of capital from legitimate foundation accounts into shell companies incorporated in different states, then offshore to accounts in Singapore and the Cayman Islands, then back into real estate purchases and personal accounts. Torres takes notes, asking clarifying questions, his expression remaining professionally neutral, even as the scope of what Caleb is describing becomes increasingly clear. By the time Caleb finishes his presentation, there are no fewer than 50 shell companies documented $20 million in foundation funds that disappeared into unauthorized channels and $15 million in unreported personal income attributed to my mother. This is thorough work, Torres says, and I hear respect in his voice. How did you obtain access to these documents? The primary source documents came from a storage unit that my client legally inherited. Caleb explains, gesturing toward me. Her grandfather, the founder of Morgan Rebuild, maintained detailed records of company activities going back decades. These records were held in secure storage, and my client, as the primary heir, has legal access to all materials contained within that storage unit. And the encrypted drive? Torres asks, looking directly at me. Was provided voluntarily by my sister, I explain, as additional documentation of criminal activity involving my mother. My sister is willing to testify regarding the contents of that drive and the circumstances under which our mother provided it to her. Torres nods and opens the folder containing copies of the documents we've brought. He flips through deeds, property valuations, tax records, email correspondence showing the bribe attempt from 1999, offshore account transfers. I watch his expression shift as the full magnitude of what we're presenting becomes clear to him. This isn't a small matter. This isn't a family squabble that can be resolved privately. This is systematic, deliberate, calculated fraud spanning decades. I'm going to need to conduct an independent investigation, Torres says, finally closing the folder. We'll use IRS subpoena power to obtain bank records from the offshore institutions, interview shell company attorneys, audit 25 years of tax returns. This is going to take time, weeks, possibly months. But based on what you've presented, I'm confident there's sufficient probable cause to move forward with a formal investigation. How long? I ask. I'd estimate 50 to 60 days before we have enough for a grand jury presentation, Torres says. But I need to be clear about something. Once we present to grand jury, this becomes public. Your family name will be in the news. Your mother's arrest will be photographed and broadcast. There will be no going back to privacy after this point. Are you prepared for that? I think about my father. I think about my grandfather spending 30 years preparing for this moment. I think about all the years I've lived in silence and shame, believing I was the problem when the problem was always my mother's unchecked corruption. I'm prepared, I tell him. The 50 days that follow feel like they stretch across years. Caleb and I maintain daily contact with Torres, providing additional documentation when requested, clarifying details about my grandfather's record-keeping system, answering questions about family business practices. The IRS subpoenas bank records from Singapore and the Cayman Islands. They interview attorneys who incorporated the shell companies. They conduct forensic analysis of tax filings going back 25 years. Piece by piece, they build an independent case that validates everything Caleb and I discovered in Unit 7. By day 140, Torres calls me with an update. We're ready for grand jury, he says. The evidence is compelling. Multiple federal crimes, clear intent, systematic concealment. I'm confident we'll get an indictment. 2 days later, Margaret Morgan is formally indicted on 15 counts tax evasion spanning 5 years, wire fraud on 3 separate occasions, money laundering on 2 counts, charity fraud on 4 separate instances, and attempted wire fraud related to the 1999 bribe attempt. The charges carry potential sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years in federal prison. The arrest happens publicly. News helicopters capture footage of federal agents arriving at my mother's home with arrest warrant. Photographs of Margaret in handcuffs appear on every local news outlet. The story breaks nationally. California woman indicted in $73 million fraud scheme, the headlines read. Morgan family fortune built on decades of financial crime. I become a public figure almost overnight. Journalists want my story. Photographers stake out my apartment. My phone rings constantly with media requests. I say nothing. I provide no interviews. I let my mother's actions speak for themselves. Then, on day 142, my phone rings with a number I don't recognize. The caller identifies herself as Rebecca Chen, a journalist from the San Francisco Chronicle, and she says something that makes my entire body go rigid. Ms. Morgan, I've been investigating your family history, she says, and I discovered court records from 1983 related to your father's death. The case file was sealed, but I obtained a copy through public records request. There's information in that file that directly contradicts the narrative your family has maintained for 40 years. I think you need to know what it says before I publish my story. The subpoena arrives on day 150, addressed to Sandra Morgan, currently residing in Zurich, Switzerland. It's a formal document requesting her presence at federal court to provide testimony regarding correspondence with Margaret Morgan spanning the 1980s and 1990s. Alvarez had discovered Sandra's existence while conducting background research on the Morgan family, had tracked her down through international databases, and had contacted her with information about the investigation into Margaret's financial crimes. What surprises me most is that Sandra responds immediately and agrees to travel to California to testify. I meet my aunt for the first time as an adult on day 155 at the federal courthouse. She's 82 years old, small and frail, in a way that suggests a lifetime of European living and careful dietary habits. Her hair is completely white-styled elegantly, and her eyes are sharp, the eyes of someone whose mind remains sharp, even as her body has grown fragile. She extends her hand to me, and when she shakes mine, I feel the tremor in her grip, but also the strength beneath it. This is a woman who has survived something, who has endured something that required enormous emotional fortitude. Rachel, she says, and her accent carries the soft blur of decades living in German-speaking countries. "I am so sorry we meet under these circumstances, but I am also grateful, because your mother has carried her secrets for too long and I have carried mine alongside her. It is time for truth." Over the next few days, Alvarez prepares Sandra for her testimony. He explains the process, the questions she'll be asked, the importance of her answers. Sandra listens carefully, and I watch her as she reviews documents, letters, and emails she received from Margaret decades ago, correspondence that shows the progression of my mother's thinking as she transitioned from controlling behavior into systematic fraud. When Sandra takes the stand on day 165, she moves slowly to the witness box, her frailty apparent to everyone in the courtroom. But when she raises her hand to be sworn in, her voice is strong and clear. The federal prosecutor begins with foundational questions establishing Sandra's identity, her relationship to Margaret, the timeline of their correspondence. Then he asks the crucial question, "Ms. Morgan, can you describe for the court the content of the communications you received from your sister Margaret during the 1980s and 1990s?" Sandra takes a breath, and I see her gather herself, preparing to betray the sister she once loved by speaking absolute truth about her. "Margaret wrote to me asking for advice on how to set up financial accounts that would not be discovered by government authorities." Sandra says, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she's admitting. "She asked me how to move money discreetly. She explained her philosophy about wealth management, that women of our class, women with substantial financial resources, manage money differently than ordinary people, that we have different rules. That transparency and full reporting were for people without proper understanding of how wealth truly works." The courtroom is completely silent as Sandra speaks. I can see Margaret in the defendant's table, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "I refused to help her," Sandra continues. "I told her that what she was describing was illegal. I told her that her justifications were rationalizations for criminal behavior." And Margaret responded with anger. She accused me of being naive, of being judgmental, of not understanding the realities of managing significant family assets. Our relationship deteriorated after that. I moved to Switzerland specifically to distance myself from her influence. I could not watch what she was doing and remain complicit through silence. The prosecutor asks Sandra about Tom's death, about how Margaret responded when learning that Rachel's father had died. "Margaret was not grieving," Sandra says, and I hear the emotion in her voice now, the decades-old pain of witnessing her sister's coldness. "She was irritated. She described Thomas as weak, as incapable of handling masculine responsibility. She spoke of his death as an embarrassment to the family rather than a tragedy, and she made no effort to comfort Rachel. The child had just lost her father, and Margaret was concerned only with what his death meant for her business operations and her control of family assets." I feel tears sliding down my face as I listen to my aunt describe what my mother's response to my father's death really meant. I feel the validation of knowing that my grandfather's perspective that my mother was fundamentally broken in some essential way was correct. I feel the weight of understanding that my own mother's coldness toward my grief was not accidental, but characteristic of who she actually is. After Sandra's testimony, the prosecutor rests his case regarding Margaret's character and long-term criminal intent. The federal judge announces that trial will begin in 90 days. 90 days for me to prepare myself psychologically. 90 days to understand that I will have to sit in a courtroom and watch my mother face the consequences of her actions. 90 days to decide whether I can maintain my own emotional integrity, or whether I will succumb to the very human desire to see her destroyed, humiliated, made to suffer the way she made others suffer. As I leave the courthouse that afternoon, Sandra takes my arm gently. "Your mother made choices," she says. "Every person makes choices. She chose deception over honesty. She chose control over connection. She chose wealth over humanity. Those choices were hers, Rachel. You are not responsible for them, but you are responsible for what you choose next. That is your inheritance, not money or property, but the freedom to choose differently than she did." I nod, understanding that my aunt has just given me permission to let go of the guilt that my mother's actions somehow reflect on me. I nod, understanding that the next 90 days will test every principle I've built this investigation upon. I nod, and I prepare myself for the trial that will change everything. The federal courthouse is packed on day 210 when jury selection begins. News cameras line the hallway outside the courtroom. Journalists camp in the gallery waiting to document every detail of the Morgan family's public unraveling. I sit behind the prosecution table, separated from my mother by the physical and symbolic distance of the courtroom itself. Margaret sits with her expensive lawyer, Robert Cohen, a man known for defending white-collar criminals with aggressive cross-examination tactics and technical objections designed to confuse rather than clarify. The jury is seated by day 215. 12 people and 4 alternates, a mix of ages and backgrounds, all of them instructed not to speak about the case with anyone. I watch them as they enter the jury box, trying to read their faces, trying to understand which of them might be sympathetic to Margaret's inevitable claims of misunderstanding, and which might see through the carefully constructed veneer of respectability that Margaret has maintained her entire life. The prosecution begins with opening statements on day 216. Assistant U.S. Attorney James Mitchell is calm and methodical, walking the jury through what they'll see and hear over the coming weeks. He explains that this case is about systematic theft, about a woman who used her position of trust to embezzle millions from a charitable foundation meant to help vulnerable people. He explains that the evidence will show deliberate intent, careful concealment, and a pattern of criminal behavior spanning decades. He promises that by the end of the trial, the jury will understand that Margaret Morgan didn't make mistakes. She made calculated choices to enrich herself at the expense of others. Margaret's lawyer offers a different narrative. He describes Margaret as a businesswoman who made complex financial decisions in good faith, who operated within the gray areas of corporate accounting, who was simply protecting family interests in ways that were perhaps unconventional, but not criminal. He suggests that the government is overreaching, that they're prosecuting normal business practices as if they were crimes, that Margaret is being used as a scapegoat for systemic failures in financial oversight. The jury listens, and I try to read their expressions, but they've been instructed to maintain neutral faces. They're professionals at this point, trained by the judge to reserve judgment until all evidence is presented. IRS Special Agent Marcus Torres takes the stand on day 217. He's dressed formally, carrying the authority of federal law enforcement, and he walks the jury through the forensic investigation with the precision of someone who has done this many times before. He displays charts on a large screen showing money flowing from legitimate Morgan Foundation accounts into shell companies. Each flow is documented with dates, amounts, account numbers. Each shell company is identified with incorporation information and beneficial owner documentation. The offshore accounts are mapped out like a crime scene photograph, each location, each account number, each transfer meticulously documented. Torres explains the purpose of each layer in the system. The shell companies served to obscure the true nature of the transfers. The multiple offshore locations made it difficult for any single country's authorities to track the full scope of the criminal enterprise. The legitimate real estate purchases that followed the offshore transfers laundered the stolen money back into the domestic system, making it appear as though Margaret had acquired properties through normal business transactions. In essence, Torres explains to the jury, Margaret Morgan created a machine designed to steal money from the Morgan Foundation and hide the theft through layers of corporate structures and international transfers. Every component of this system had a specific purpose. Every layer was deliberately constructed. This was not accidental. This was not the result of sloppy accounting practices. This was systematic, calculated fraud. Margaret's lawyer cross-examines Torres, aggressively trying to poke holes in the forensic methodology, trying to suggest that Torres is interpreting ambiguous financial transactions as criminal when they might have legitimate explanations. But Torres has prepared thoroughly. He's anticipated every question. He responds with documentation with transaction records, with clear evidence that each component of the system had no legitimate business purpose. Caleb takes the stand on day 222 as expert witness in forensic accounting. He's nervous in a way I've never seen him before, but his nervousness disappears the moment he begins speaking about the financial records. He walks the jury through the Foundation's legitimate accounting practices, showing them what proper disbursement documentation looks like. Then he contrasts those legitimate transactions with the fraudulent ones, highlighting how money that should have appeared in Foundation records simply disappeared into shell company accounts. The complexity of this system, Caleb tells the jury, is significant. 53 shell companies, multiple offshore locations, years of carefully constructed transfers. But complexity itself is evidence of intent. If Margaret Morgan had simply made accounting errors or misunderstood financial regulations, her mistakes would have been simple and relatively easy to correct once discovered. Instead, we see layers upon layers of deliberate obfuscation designed specifically to prevent discovery. Margaret's lawyer attacks Caleb's credibility during cross-examination, suggesting that Caleb is biased because he was fired by the Morgan Foundation years ago, that he has a personal vendetta against Margaret. But Caleb remains composed, acknowledging that he was terminated, but emphasizing that his analysis of the financial records is objective and based on documentation, not emotion. I testify on day 228. The prosecution walks me through my discovery of Unit 7, the contents of the storage unit, my process for photographing and documenting everything I found. I explain that I accessed the unit legally as the primary heir to Morgan Rebuild. I describe the property deeds, the documentation, the clear evidence that my grandfather had been meticulously recording my mother's financial activities for decades. Did you remove anything from the storage unit without documenting it first? The prosecutor asks. No, I respond. I photographed everything in place before removing any documents. I created detailed inventory lists with timestamps. I maintained the documents in secure storage. I was very careful about the chain of custody because I understood that this information might eventually be used in legal proceedings. Margaret's lawyer cross-examines me briefly, trying to suggest that I had personal bias against my mother, that I was motivated by revenge rather than truth. I respond calmly that I had no bias when I entered Unit 7. I was simply trying to understand what my grandfather had left me. Everything I discovered came from the documents themselves, not from any pre-existing assumption about my mother's guilt. By day 235, 18 days into the trial, the prosecution's case is becoming overwhelming. The jury has heard from forensic accountants, from federal investigators, from my own testimony about the discovery of evidence. They've seen charts and transaction records and documentation spanning decades. They've heard expert witnesses explain how the systematic, deliberate, calculated nature of the fraud proves intent. Then, on day 237, Vanessa takes the stand. My sister is pale and shaking as she approaches the witness box. She's sworn in, and the prosecutor begins walking her through her role in the $3 million withdrawal from the Foundation years ago. Did your mother explicitly authorize you to withdraw $3 million from the Foundation? The prosecutor asks. She told me it was authorized, Vanessa says, her voice barely audible. But now I understand that she was lying. She was setting me up as scapegoat. I watch Margaret's face as Vanessa testifies. For the first time, I see something cross my mother's expression that might be surprise. Might be the realization that her own daughter has chosen truth over loyalty. My mother's hands grip the table so tightly that her knuckles turn white, and she stares at Vanessa with an expression that contains contempt and betrayal in equal measure. Margaret's lawyer informed the court that his client would testify in her own defense on day 245. This decision surprised no one who understood criminal trial strategy. Margaret believed she could convince the jury of her innocence. Through direct testimony, believed her version of events would be more compelling than the documentary evidence the prosecution had presented. I watch her take the stand in a navy suit that costs more than most people's monthly rent. Her posture upright, her expression carefully arranged into an appearance of concerned dignity. The prosecutor begins his examination with foundational questions establishing Margaret's role at the Morgan Foundation, her responsibilities regarding financial management, her authority over asset transfers. Margaret answers these questions easily, her confidence evident in the way she phrases her responses. She's articulate and composed, and I can see some members of the jury seeming to relax slightly, as if Margaret's demeanor is somehow evidence of her innocence. Then the prosecutor asks the first difficult question. Mrs. Morgan, can you explain why the Morgan Foundation's legitimate charitable disbursements and your personal financial transfers use identical account structures? Margaret hesitates. It's brief, barely perceptible, but it's there. I used efficient account structures for all financial management, she says, but her voice carries less confidence now. There's nothing inherently suspicious about using similar systems for different purposes. But these weren't different purposes, were they? The prosecutor counters, pulling up a chart showing side-by-side comparisons of legitimate foundation transfers and fraudulent ones. These legitimate disbursements went to actual charities, actual programs, actual people. But your personal transfers went to shell companies with no apparent business purpose. Why would you use identical account structures for such different activities? For efficiency. Margaret insists, but I hear the defensiveness creeping into her voice. The prosecutor continues methodically question after question, walking Margaret through the shell companies she created, the offshore accounts she funded the property, purchases she made with diverted foundation money. With each question, Margaret's answers become increasingly inconsistent. She claims ignorance about some shell companies, claims legitimate business purposes for others, claims that the transfers were all properly authorized and documented. But the prosecutor returns to the documentary evidence repeatedly showing emails Margaret sent, showing transfer instructions in her handwriting, showing bank records indicating that Margaret personally initiated each transaction. By day 247, Margaret's composure is beginning to crack. Her answers are shorter, more defensive. She's stopped trying to provide elaborate explanations and instead is making blanket denials about transactions that the documentary evidence clearly shows she orchestrated. Then the prosecutor asks about my father. Mrs. Morgan, you've testified that you were simply managing family assets in what you believe to be a legitimate manner. But I want to ask you about Thomas Morgan, Rachel's father. Did you threaten Thomas Morgan regarding his paternity of Rachel? Margaret's face goes rigid. I watch her calculate the risk of denying something we have on audio, recording something she admitted to during the cabin conversation with me that was captured by my voice recorder, even though that recording won't be used as evidence. I may have said things during a difficult time, Margaret finally responds. Did you tell him that Rachel was not his biological daughter? The prosecutor presses. That was a private family matter, Margaret says, her voice suddenly sharp, angry. It was not relevant to... It's relevant to intent, the prosecutor interrupts. It's relevant to understanding your character and your willingness to manipulate family members. Did you threaten him with this claim to keep him silent about your financial activities? Margaret doesn't answer immediately. The silence in the courtroom extends, becomes unbearable. When she finally speaks, her voice is cold in a way that makes even the jurors shift uncomfortably in their seats. Tom was weak, Margaret says. He couldn't handle the realities of business. He wanted to be a Boy Scout about finances, wanted to expose everything, wanted to destroy the family structure that I had built. If I told him things that kept him compliant, that kept him from making catastrophic decisions, then yes, I did what was necessary. Even if those things were lies. The prosecutor asks, truth is relative in business. Margaret responds, and I hear the jaw clench of several jurors. Some people understand that. Some people don't. The prosecutor walks Margaret through the offshore accounts, through the shell companies, through years of fraudulent transfers. Margaret maintains that she was simply protecting family assets, that her methods were unconventional but not criminal, that everyone in business operates in similar ways. But her testimony is undermined at every turn by documentary evidence that directly contradicts her claims. When the prosecutor finishes his cross-examination on day 250, Margaret is visibly shaken. Her composure has crumbled. She looks diminished, somehow smaller than when she entered the witness box, as if the act of defending her actions has physically drained her. The prosecution rests its case. Margaret's lawyer calls a handful of character witnesses people from Margaret's business circles who testify to her reputation as a competent businesswoman. But their testimony pales in comparison to the documentary evidence and the expert witnesses who explained the systematic nature of Margaret's fraud. Closing arguments happen on day 255. The prosecutor systematically walks the jury through the evidence, showing how each piece supports the conclusion of deliberate calculated fraud. He shows them the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the property transfers, the systematic concealment. He reminds them of Margaret's testimony, how she couldn't adequately explain any of her actions, how her explanations grew increasingly defensive as she was confronted with documentary evidence. Margaret's lawyer argues that the government is overreaching, that complex business transactions are being mischaracterized as crimes, that Margaret is being prosecuted for legitimate financial management. But his argument rings hollow in light of everything the jury has heard and seen. Jury deliberations begin on day 257. The jury takes 5 days to reach a verdict, but when they finally return on day 262, the foreman announces guilty on all 15 counts: tax evasion, wire fraud, money laundering, charity fraud, attempted wire fraud, guilty, 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 guilty. Margaret's face shows nothing. She's completely still, as if she's somehow left her body and is observing this moment from a distance. The judge immediately remands her into custody, denying bail. Federal marshals approach her, and as they place handcuffs on her wrists, she finally moves. She stands, she turns, and she looks directly at me sitting in the gallery. Our eyes meet for just a moment, and in that moment I see something in her expression that might be recognition of what she's done, or might just be cold calculation about what comes next. Then she's led from the courtroom through the gallery where news cameras flash, and reporters shout questions out of the building, and into federal custody, where she'll remain until sentencing. 2 weeks later, at the sentencing hearing, the judge offers me the opportunity to make a victim impact statement. I stand to speak, and I choose not to talk about my mother at all. The sentencing hearing takes place on day 290 in the same federal courtroom where Margaret was convicted. The judge, Honorable Patricia Whitmore, is a woman in her late 60s, with the bearing of someone who has heard countless stories of human failure and criminal enterprise. She takes her time reviewing the pre-sentencing report, examining the forensic evidence one final time, considering the recommendations from both the prosecution and the defense. The courtroom is packed with media, with curious observers, with people whose lives have been affected by Margaret's fraud. Before the judge pronounces sentence, she offers me the opportunity to make a victim impact statement. I stand, and my hands are shaking as I approach the podium. Margaret sits at the defense table, her expression carefully neutral, as if she's somehow managed to create emotional distance between herself and the consequences of her actions. Your Honor, I begin, and my voice is steadier than I expected it to be. I want to speak today about my father, Thomas Morgan, because his death is the foundation of everything that led to this trial, and I need the court to understand what happened to him. I look directly at Margaret, then turn my attention to the judge. My father died in 1983. For my entire adult life, I believed he abandoned me. I believed he was weak, and that he chose depression over family. I was told that his suicide was a personal failing, that it reflected something broken within him. But the truth is far more complicated. The truth is that my father died slowly. Every single day he lived in a situation where he was forced to choose between protecting truth and protecting me. I pause, gathering strength to continue. My mother threatened him with the false claim that I was not his biological daughter. She used that threat to keep him silent about her financial crimes. She created a situation where my father could not be honest without losing me. He could not expose her fraud without risking that she would follow through on her threat. And that impossible choice, that psychological trap, is what destroyed him. My father didn't abandon me because he was weak. My father died because my mother made survival impossible. I feel tears sliding down my face, but I continue. My grandfather understood what my mother had done. He spent 30 years building a hidden inheritance specifically to protect me from her. And when I finally discovered that inheritance, I learned that my mother had systematically stolen millions from a charitable foundation meant to help vulnerable women. She had created an empire of lies and financial crimes. She had destroyed lives, not just my father's life, but the lives of countless women who were supposed to be helped by the foundation she pillaged. I look at Margaret directly now. I'm not here today asking for mercy for my mother. I'm not here asking for leniency or reduced sentences. What I'm asking is that this court recognize the scope of what she did. That this court understand that her crimes were not merely financial. They were deeply personal. They were calculated to destroy anyone who threatened her control. And they were perpetuated with complete absence of remorse. I turn back to the judge. Justice won't bring my father back. Justice won't restore the funds that were stolen from the charitable foundation. Justice won't undo the years I spent believing I was worthless because my own family treated me like garbage. But justice will establish that truth matters, that accountability matters, that my father's impossible situation mattered, and that is enough. I return to my seat, and the courtroom is completely silent. Margaret stares at the table in front of her, refusing to make eye contact with me or with anyone else in the courtroom. The judge takes time to read the sentencing guidelines to explain the factors she's considered in arriving at her decision. She acknowledges the severity of the crimes, the systematic and calculated nature of the fraud, Margaret's complete absence of remorse, even after conviction. She notes that Margaret's psychological abuse of family members demonstrates a pattern of predatory behavior that goes beyond financial crime. Margaret Morgan, Judge Whitmore says, her voice carrying the weight of official authority. You have been found guilty on 15 counts of federal crimes, including tax evasion, wire fraud, money laundering, and charity fraud. You have shown no remorse for your actions. You have blamed others, justified your crimes as necessary business practices, and demonstrated complete disregard for the vulnerable women your foundation was meant to serve. The judge pauses, and the silence extends across the courtroom. Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that you are sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. You are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $50 million to be structured as $500,000 per year from prison wages supplemented by confiscation of your personal assets and any remaining estate holdings. You are permanently barred from holding any professional licenses or business certifications. Upon your release, you will be subject to 10 years supervised probation. This sentence reflects the seriousness of your crimes and the necessity of protecting the public from further victimization. Margaret is immediately taken into federal custody. She doesn't resist. She doesn't cry. She simply stands, extends her wrists for handcuffs, and is led from the courtroom. The media erupts into chaos, journalists shouting questions, cameras flashing, the entire machinery of public attention focused on my mother's humiliation. I leave the courthouse without speaking to anyone. I drive directly to my apartment in Oakland, and for the first time since this entire process began, I'm alone. That evening, I sit on my couch in the darkness of my apartment and I cry. Not tears of joy or triumph, but tears of release and complicated grief. Justice has been served. The system has worked. My mother will spend the next 15 years in federal prison. But the cost of that justice is staggering. The cost is the public exposure of my family's destruction. The cost is the revelation of my father's death circumstances broadcast across media outlets. The cost is the permanent rupture of what remained of my family structure. The victory feels hollow because the price was so high. 3 weeks later, a letter arrives at my apartment. It's postmarked from the Federal Correctional Facility in Northern California, where my mother is being held while awaiting transfer to her permanent prison assignment. The envelope is plain, addressed to me in handwriting I recognize. My hands tremble slightly as I open it. The letter begins, simply, Rachel. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know something I've never told anyone, something that will change how you understand everything that happened. I read Margaret's letter sitting at my kitchen table on a gray afternoon, the light filtering through my window, creating shadows that seem to match the complexity of what I'm reading. The letter is several pages long, written in Margaret's precise handwriting, and it's both confession and justification, both revelation and rationalization, all woven together in a way that makes it difficult to categorize as either truth or manipulation. Margaret begins by acknowledging that she spent her entire adult life terrified of powerlessness. She writes about her own childhood, about a mother who was dependent and fragile, who relied entirely on men for survival, who lost everything when her husband died and was left with nothing. Margaret writes that she swore to herself as a child that she would never be that vulnerable. She would never depend on anyone. She would never be at the mercy of someone else's decisions or circumstances. I built control systems, Margaret writes, because control felt like survival. Money was power. Knowledge was power. Being indispensable to family structure was power. I thought that if I controlled enough, if I managed enough, if I stayed vigilant enough, I could prevent the kind of devastation I watched my mother experience. But somewhere along the way, the systems I built to protect myself became systems that destroyed everyone around me. She writes about my father. She acknowledges that Tom represented everything her control systems couldn't manage. He wanted to be honest. He wanted to be transparent about finances. He wanted to expose her activities to authorities. He was the opposite of controllable, and that terrified her. So she threatened him the only way she knew how, by threatening to take away what he loved most. I knew that threat would destroy him, Margaret writes. I knew even then that forcing him to choose between truth and you was impossible. But I made the threat anyway because I was operating from a place of pure fear. I was afraid of losing control. I was afraid of authorities investigating me. I was afraid of being like my mother, powerless and dependent. So I sacrificed your father to maintain my illusion of control. There's no apology in the letter. Margaret doesn't ask for forgiveness. She doesn't express regret in the conventional way that might suggest she wishes she'd made different choices. Instead, she simply states facts about her motivations, about her psychology, about the fear that drove her actions. It's an explanation, not an excuse. It's understanding, not redemption. I read the letter 3 times before I can process what I'm feeling. I don't feel rage. I don't feel vindication. I feel something more complicated than either of those emotions. I feel recognition that my mother is human in the way that all humans are human, broken, terrified, operating from wounds that run deep. That evening, I write a response. I don't mail it. I just write it for myself to clarify my own thinking about what Margaret has told me. I understand you now, Mother, I write. I understand that your childhood created defenses that became criminal. I understand that your fear of powerlessness drove you to create systems of absolute control. I understand that you weaponized money and lies because those were the tools you had available. I understand all of this. But understanding doesn't change what you did. Understanding doesn't restore what you took from my father. Understanding doesn't undo the years I spent believing I was worthless. Understanding doesn't reverse the damage you caused to so many vulnerable women through the foundation you pillaged. I pause, choosing my next words carefully. I can acknowledge your humanity without forgiving your crimes. I can see you as a broken person without accepting the narrative that your brokenness justifies your actions. I can understand the woman who harmed me while still protecting myself from further harm. And that understanding is actually my freedom. Because as long as I'm waiting for you to change, as long as I'm carrying the burden of your redemption, I remain tethered to you. But if I release that burden, if I acknowledge that your transformation or lack thereof isn't my responsibility, then I'm finally free. I don't send the letter. I keep it for myself, a record of the moment I stopped being defined by my mother's actions and started being defined by my own choices. The real shift comes 3 weeks later on day 320 when my phone rings and it's Maria Santos, the program director for the foundation I've been working with since my mother's conviction. Maria's voice is excited in a way I haven't heard before. "Rachel, we need to talk," she says. We're getting overwhelming response from women across California. We've had over 200 inquiries in the past month alone. Women wanting financial literacy education, legal assistance, help escaping controlling situations. Our current capacity is completely maxed out. We need to expand immediately. We need more funding, more staff, more locations. Can we set up a meeting to discuss expansion? I close my eyes and let this information settle. While I've been processing my mother's letter, while I've been sitting with the complexity of understanding her without forgiving her, something else has been happening. The foundation has been growing. Women have been finding help. The suffering that my mother caused has been transformed into hope through something I helped create. Yes, I tell Maria. Let's meet tomorrow. Let's talk about expansion. Let's talk about how many more women we can reach. As I hang up the phone, I realize that this is what my grandfather understood when he spent 30 years building his inheritance for me. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about destroying my mother. It was about creating the possibility that her harm could be transformed into healing. It was about the understanding that the most powerful inheritance isn't wealth or property, but the freedom to choose who you become in response to what you've been given. My mother is in prison. She will spend 15 years there, and perhaps that time will teach her something about powerlessness and accountability. Perhaps it won't. Either way, that's no longer my responsibility to manage or control or influence. My responsibility is to the women who are reaching out for help, who are discovering that they can escape controlling situations, who are learning that financial independence is possible. That is my inheritance. That is my freedom. That is what my grandfather left me. The meeting with Maria happens the next day, and by the end of it, we've outlined the framework for Silent Strength Initiative's expansion. Maria's enthusiasm is infectious, but what strikes me most is her understanding that this work goes far beyond charity. We're not just helping women in crisis. We're interrupting generational patterns of control. We're teaching women that financial literacy is accessible, that independence is possible at any age, that they are not stupid for having been controlled, they were simply caught in systems designed specifically to exploit them. Over the following week, Vanessa and I work with Caleb and Alvarez to establish the legal structure for Silent Strength Initiative. We create a nonprofit with a board of directors that includes women from diverse backgrounds, a retired business executive, a social worker who specializes in domestic abuse, a financial advisor, and a lawyer who focuses on family law. We deliberately exclude anyone from the Morgan family except Vanessa, and we structure governance in a way that prevents any single person from accumulating unchecked power. The funding comes from two sources. Tom's Redemption Fund, finally released to me now that I've reached my 38th birthday, provides the initial capital of $2.3 million. This money carries the weight of my father's intentions, his love expressed through a financial vehicle my grandfather created decades ago. Additionally, we secure $1 million annually from the income generated by Morgan Rebuild Properties real estate that my grandfather carefully protected and documented, now transformed into a revenue stream that funds healing instead of fueling hidden fraud. Rachel creates the foundation with deliberate transparency. We establish a website where every dollar is tracked, every program is documented, every outcome is measured and reported publicly. We intentionally create the opposite of what my mother built. Instead of hidden shell companies and undisclosed transfers, we build systems where accountability is not just a value, but a structural reality. Donors know exactly where their money goes. Participants understand exactly how their contributions are being used. The foundation offers multiple services. Financial literacy classes teach women aged 55 and older how to understand banking, credit, investment, and basic accounting principles that many have been prevented from learning throughout their lives. Legal aid clinics partner with attorneys who volunteer their time to help women navigate divorce proceedings, property settlements, and legal separation from controlling family members. Psychological counseling services provide trauma-informed therapy for women processing decades of emotional manipulation and control. Safe housing transition programs help women who need to physically leave controlling situations establish independent living arrangements with dignity and security. But what makes Silent Strength different from other charitable organizations is our laser focus on a specific demographic. We deliberately target women aged 55 and older who have spent decades in controlling situations. Women who were told they were incapable of managing money. Women who surrendered financial control to husbands or parents or adult children out of fear or social conditioning or genuine belief that they lacked the capacity to understand complex financial systems. Women who thought they were too old to start over. Women who believed they were too stupid to learn. Women like I might have become if my grandfather hadn't built his inheritance specifically to protect me. Vanessa joins as Community Liaison Director on day 325, and I watch her transform into someone I barely recognize. The woman who once participated in her mother's fraud schemes becomes an advocate for women escaping similar situations. Vanessa's role involves outreach to community organizations, facilitation of support groups, personal mentoring of participants, and coordination with legal and psychological professionals. What's remarkable is how women respond to Vanessa. They see in her a reflection of themselves, someone who didn't fully understand what was happening, someone who participated in family systems without fully grasping the implications, someone who finally found the courage to stand up to authority figures and speak truth, even when it cost her everything. Vanessa becomes living proof that redemption through accountability is possible. She becomes proof that a person can recognize her own complicity, process her guilt, and transform that processing into meaningful service. On day 330, Silent Strength Initiative officially opens. We've secured a beautiful office space in downtown Oakland, bright windows, comfortable furniture, an atmosphere designed to feel safe rather than institutional. The official launch is modest, not a grand event with donors and media, but a gathering of the women who responded to our initial outreach, along with staff and volunteers and the board of directors. I lead the first financial literacy class myself. There are 15 women in the room, ages ranging from 56 to 83. They're nervous at first, uncertain whether they're capable of understanding financial concepts. Many apologize for their lack of knowledge. Several reference times when husbands or fathers or adult children made them feel stupid for not understanding money management. I begin with a simple statement. Financial literacy is not inherent. It's learned. And if you were prevented from learning, that doesn't mean you're incapable. It means you were controlled. I watch understanding dawn on their faces. I watch women recognize themselves in my words. I walk them through basic banking concepts, credit scores, investment principles. I deliberately use language that's accessible rather than technical. I emphasize repeatedly that questions are welcome, that confusion is normal, that intelligence and financial literacy are not the same thing. After the class ends, a woman named Dorothy, aged 62, approaches me. She's been crying softly during the class, and now she grips my arm with surprising strength. I spent 40 years thinking I was stupid about money, Dorothy says, her voice shaking slightly. 40 years. My husband managed everything. He told me I couldn't understand numbers, couldn't manage decisions, couldn't be trusted with financial responsibility. And I believed him. I internalized that belief. I thought I was just not smart enough. Dorothy pauses, gathering herself. Today, listening to you, I realized something. I wasn't stupid. I was controlled. He made sure I never learned. He made sure I stayed dependent. And that's not stupidity. That's abuse. I take Dorothy's hand and I feel the weight of understanding settle between us. This is why the work matters. This is why my grandfather spent 30 years building an inheritance. This is why my mother's fraud, as devastating as it was, can be transformed into something healing. Because the moment Dorothy understands that she's not stupid, that she was simply controlled, her entire relationship to herself changes. Her entire understanding of her own capacity changes. You're not stupid, I tell her. You were systematically prevented from learning. And now you have the opportunity to learn. Now you have the opportunity to be independent. Now you have the opportunity to be free." Dorothy nods, and I see the tears spilling down her cheeks. But they're different now. They're tears of recognition, tears of relief, tears of hope. By day 350, Silent Strength Initiative has moved beyond the initial launch phase and entered a period of exponential growth that Maria and I didn't anticipate would happen so quickly. Women are contacting us from across California. The waiting list for our programs has grown to over 300 people. Media outlets have started noticing the Foundation's work, and stories are beginning to circulate about women whose lives have been transformed through our programs. Susan is one of the first women whose story we document with her permission. She's 58 years old and spent 42 years married to a man who controlled every aspect of her financial life. Her husband managed the bank accounts, made all investment decisions, and explicitly prevented her from working outside the home by claiming that he needed her to focus entirely on family management. Susan never owned property in her own name. She never had her own credit card. She never understood her family's actual financial situation because her husband deliberately obscured it from her. When her husband threatened divorce after discovering her affair with a neighbor, Susan realized she had no financial independence, no savings of her own, no way to support herself. Her husband used this knowledge as leverage, threatening to leave her with nothing if she didn't agree to his terms. She came to Silent Strength completely broken, believing she was trapped permanently in an impossible situation. Through our program, Susan learned to open her own bank account. She learned to establish credit history. She worked with our legal aid clinic to understand her actual rights in divorce proceedings, discovering that her husband's threats had no legal basis. Within 6 months, Susan had saved enough money from part-time work to secure an apartment deposit. Within a year, she finalized her divorce on terms that were fair and equitable. Today, Susan works as a volunteer at the Foundation, helping other women understand that independence is achievable regardless of age or previous financial experience. Another participant is Margaret, a different Margaret than my mother, a woman aged 67 who discovered that her adult son had been controlling her finances for years under the guise of protecting her after her husband's death. The son had convinced Margaret that she was incapable of managing investments, that she would be victimized by financial predators if she tried to manage her own money, that her best option was complete dependence on his financial decision-making. By the time Margaret came to Silent Strength, she had almost no understanding of her own assets, no access to her bank accounts without her son's involvement, and profound doubt about her own capability. Working with our foundation, Margaret reclaimed control of her finances. She learned about her investments. She established her own banking relationships. She had difficult but necessary conversations with her adult son about boundaries and respect. The relationship transformed from one based on control and dependency to one based on mutual respect and autonomy. Her son, initially resistant, eventually came to understand that his mother's independence didn't threaten him. It actually strengthened their relationship by removing the dynamic of control that had been poisoning it. Caleb has become essential to the Foundation's work in ways that extend far beyond his initial role. He's developed what we call the Financial Abuse Recognition Protocol, a detailed checklist that helps women identify patterns of financial control they might not recognize as abuse. Women often don't realize they're being financially abused because the control is subtle, masked as protection or necessity or love. Caleb's protocol helps them recognize the warning signs: restriction of access to bank accounts, deliberate complication of financial records, designed to prevent understanding use of financial threat as coercion, prevention of employment or financial independence, isolation from financial decision-making. Beyond the protocol, Caleb works one-on-one with women in transition, helping them untangle finances that have been deliberately complicated by controlling partners or family members. He teaches them to read bank statements, understand investment accounts, recognize fraudulent activity. He combines technical expertise with emotional intelligence, understanding that many women have been taught to believe they're incapable of understanding financial concepts. Caleb's gift is his ability to demystify financial systems, while validating the very real trauma of having been controlled through money. The Foundation's visibility begins growing on day 365, when I receive my first media interview request. NPR wants to discuss financial abuse patterns for their economics podcast. I'm nervous about going public with my family's story, but I understand that my story has power precisely because it's both personal and universal. I agree to the interview. During the podcast, I discuss how financial abuse operates, how it's often invisible to outsiders, how it can persist for decades within families without detection. I talk about my mother's crimes not to shame her publicly, but to illuminate patterns that countless women experience. The podcast is listened to by over 500,000 people, and within weeks we receive hundreds of new inquiries from women recognizing themselves in the story. Following the NPR interview, I'm invited to give presentations at women's organizations, universities, and nonprofit conferences. I speak about financial independence as a fundamental human right. I discuss how generational trauma can be interrupted through education and intentional systems of support. I explain how my grandfather's 30-year plan wasn't ultimately about money. It was about creating the conditions for my freedom. The Washington Post op-ed comes next, published on day 375 under the title, How Inherited Trauma Became Inherited Healing. In the piece, I discuss how my mother's fraud could have destroyed me, how instead I chose to transform it into something that serves others. I write about the women I've met through silent strength, about their courage, about their discovery that they're not stupid, but simply controlled. I write about how my father's impossible situation created the conditions for my grandfather's planning, and how that planning eventually led to the foundation that's now helping hundreds of women. The op-ed generates enormous response. We receive over 1,000 new inquiries from women seeking help. Universities request me as a speaker. Women's organizations ask me to consult on their own financial abuse prevention programs. Foundations contact me about funding partnerships. What began as a personal mission to understand my family's secrets has transformed into a public voice advocating for women's financial independence and freedom from control. On day 378, I receive an email that changes everything. It's from the United Nations Women's Initiative, and the message is marked urgent. The sender, Dr. Amara Okonkwo, introduces herself as the Director of Programming for the UN Women's Summit, scheduled to take place in New York in 6 months. Dr. Okonkwo writes, Your story is not just an American story. It's a universal story. Women from every continent recognize themselves in your journey. We would like to invite you to be a keynote speaker at our annual summit. We believe your voice is needed on a global platform. I read the email 3 times trying to process what it means. My story, my family's dysfunction, my mother's crimes, my personal healing is being recognized as having relevance beyond my own circumstances. Women worldwide are connecting with my experience because financial control, psychological abuse, and generational trauma are not uniquely American problems. They're human problems. They're universal patterns that transcend culture, economics, and geography. Vanessa tells me about the pregnancy on day 420, and her announcement carries a weight that goes far beyond the simple fact of expecting a child. We're sitting in my apartment after a foundation board meeting, and she's been quiet all evening, unusually withdrawn. Finally, she takes a breath and says the words, I'm pregnant, Rachel. I didn't plan it. The father left when I told him, and I'm terrified. I set down my coffee and take her hand. Terrified about what? About becoming her, Vanessa says, and I understand immediately that she means Margaret. About controlling my child the way she controlled us. About using money or guilt or manipulation to keep someone dependent on me. About passing down all the broken patterns to another generation. Over the following weeks, Vanessa begins therapy specifically focused on processing her fears about motherhood and breaking generational cycles. She attends sessions with a therapist who specializes in intergenerational trauma, and she comes to me afterward with homework assignments and insights about her own childhood, her own complicity in our mother's systems, her own need to heal before bringing a child into the world. I become her anchor through this process. I attend childbirth classes with her. I research parenting philosophies with her, focusing on approaches that emphasize autonomy, critical thinking, and healthy boundaries. We have long conversations about what healthy motherhood looks like, what a parent can provide without controlling how to love a child fiercely while still allowing them to become themselves. I want to tell her the truth about our family, Vanessa says during one of these conversations. Not the sanitized version, the real story. But I want to age it appropriately, tell her in ways she can understand as she grows up. I want her to know about Dad, about Grandpa Henry, about the pattern we're breaking. That's good, I tell her. That's healing. Secrets are what allowed Mom to do what she did. Truth is what's going to set the next generation free. Vanessa gives birth to a daughter on day 465. I'm in the hospital waiting room when the nurse comes out and tells me the baby is healthy. The delivery was uncomplicated and Vanessa is asking for me. I rush into the recovery room and find my sister holding a tiny human tears streaming down her face and an expression on her face that contains both terror and profound love. This is Eleanor, Vanessa says, her voice shaking slightly. Rachel, this is Eleanor. I hold Eleanor for the first time, and I feel the weight of generational responsibility settle into my arms. This child will grow up knowing the truth about our family. This child will understand that her great-grandfather was a man who loved deeply and died in despair. This child will know that her grandmother is in prison for committing crimes. This child will understand that her mother broke generational cycles through courage and accountability. This child will have the foundation to build something better. Rachel and I formally establish what we call our conscious parenting agreement on day 470, 3 days after Eleanor's birth. We write it down, sign it, and keep it somewhere safe. The agreement commits us to teaching Eleanor financial literacy starting from age 5. We commit to never using money as reward or punishment. We commit to encouraging independence and critical thinking rather than compliance and obedience. We commit to modeling healthy boundaries and demonstrating that it's possible to love someone while still maintaining autonomy. Most importantly, we commit to telling Eleanor the truth about her family history, aged appropriately to her understanding. When she's old enough to ask questions, we'll tell her about her great-grandfather Tom, about his impossible situation, about how he loved her, even though he never knew her. We'll tell her about her great-great-grandfather Henry, about his 30-year plan to protect his family. We'll tell her about her grandmother Margaret and the crimes she committed, explaining that people are capable of great harm and that understanding that doesn't require forgiving it. I officially become Eleanor's godmother not as a ceremonial role, but as an active participant in her life. I'm present at her first doctor's appointments. I'm there for her first smile, her first laugh, her first attempt to grasp objects. I watch Vanessa transform into a mother, and what strikes me most is how conscious her parenting is, how intentional, how different from what we experienced. The deepening of Rachel and Vanessa's relationship happens gradually but undeniably over the following months. We're no longer separated by the dynamics of our childhood, by competition, for resources, by the victim-perpetrator dynamic that characterized our earlier relationship. Instead, we're partners in an intentional project, raising the next generation differently. We're allies working toward a shared vision of breaking cycles of control, secrecy, and manipulation. Vanessa tells me during one of our late-night conversations while holding Eleanor, I don't know how to thank you for not destroying me when you could have. When you had all the evidence, when you could have buried me along with Mom, you chose to see me as a person caught in a broken system instead of as a criminal. That choice saved my life. You made the choice to tell the truth, I remind her. I just didn't punish you for making it. It's more than that, Vanessa insists. You showed me what healing looked like. You showed me that you could be angry at our mother without being destroyed by that anger. You showed me that you could seek justice without seeking revenge. You taught me that accountability could lead to redemption rather than just to destruction. On day 490, Vanessa participates in Eleanor's dedication ceremony at a small Unitarian church in Oakland. The ceremony is deliberately secular and spiritual, at the same time designed to honor Eleanor's entrance into the world while committing to her well-being and development. Friends and family members who have become like family through our work at the foundation fill the pews. When it's Vanessa's turn to speak her vows as Eleanor's mother, I watch her stand before the gathered community and make promises about the life she's committing to provide for her daughter. She speaks about raising Eleanor with financial independence and autonomy. She speaks about teaching Eleanor critical thinking rather than blind obedience. She speaks about modeling healthy boundaries and demonstrating that love doesn't require control. "I'm raising my daughter," Vanessa says, her voice carrying certainty and commitment, "to know that she deserves freedom, that she deserves autonomy, that she deserves to make her own choices even when those choices are different from what I would choose. I'm raising her to understand our family history not as shame, but as a blueprint for what not to do. I'm raising her to know that she can break cycles that have trapped generations before her." I'm crying by the time Vanessa finishes speaking. Not because I'm sad, but because I'm witnessing exactly what my grandfather understood would be possible if we could just interrupt the cycles of control and secrecy. I'm watching my sister become the kind of mother we needed. I'm watching generational trauma being transformed into generational healing. This is what healing looks like across generations. This is what it means to inherit freedom instead of inherit pain. The phone call from the Federal Correctional Facility comes on day 540, and the voice on the other end is clinical professional carrying the weight of institutional communication. A prison physician is calling to inform me that Margaret Morgan has suffered a cardiac event. She's been transferred to the prison medical facility. Her condition is stable but serious. They're monitoring her closely. I receive the information without the surge of emotion I might have expected. I thank the physician for the notification and end the call. I don't feel panic or urgency or even particular concern. I feel distant, as if I'm hearing about something that happened to someone else, someone I used to know but no longer have connection to. Over the following days, I receive periodic updates. Margaret is recovering from the initial heart attack, but her condition remains precarious. She's not eating well. She's not engaging in prison activities. She's spending most of her time alone in her cell. The prison chaplain has begun visiting her. Whether this is Margaret's request or standard protocol, I don't know. I don't ask for clarification. By day 550, the updates become less frequent and more ominous. Margaret has developed complications. She's refusing some medical interventions. The prison physician notes that her health deterioration seems consistent with someone who has given up fighting, someone who has accepted that recovery isn't something she's willing to pursue. I tell Vanessa about Margaret's declining health, and my sister's reaction mirrors my own. She feels sadness, but not the consuming sadness of losing someone she loves. She feels the complicated sadness of losing someone who harmed her, someone she can never fully reconcile with, someone whose death will bring closure of a sort, but not healing. On day 560, exactly 2 years after my grandfather's will reading, I receive official notification that Margaret Morgan died in Federal Prison Medical Facility at 3:45 in the morning. The cause was cardiac arrest secondary to complications from hypertension and stress-related illness. She was 80 years old. The notification is formal, bureaucratic, stripped of emotion or significance. I read the notification 3 times, and what strikes me most powerfully is the absence of feeling. I don't cry. I don't feel relief or satisfaction or vindication. I feel emptiness. I feel the recognition that the woman I've been fighting against, the woman whose actions set this entire chain of events in motion, is simply gone. Not transformed, not redeemed, not even dramatically deceased, just gone. Dead. Finished. I understand in that moment that I already mourned my mother's loss. I mourned it months ago when I realized who she actually was beneath the carefully constructed veneer of respectability. The woman in federal prison wasn't my mother anymore. She was just a body carrying the consequences of her own choices, a woman who had lost everything and who couldn't adapt to powerlessness after spending her entire life building systems to avoid it. I call Vanessa and tell her the news. She's quiet for a long moment, and I can hear Eleanor crying in the background, the sound of life continuing of the next generation, unaware and unconcerned with the death of someone they never knew. "Are you okay?" Vanessa finally asks. "I don't know," I say honestly. I expected to feel something more. Maybe that's what healing feels like, Vanessa suggests. Not dramatic emotion, just moving forward. I make the arrangements for cremation per the instructions in Margaret's will. She had specifically requested no funeral, no service, no family gathering. I don't attend any ceremony. I simply authorize the cremation and arrange for her ashes to be held at the crematorium, pending instructions about what to do with them. Instead of attending a memorial service, I do something that feels more meaningful to me. On day 565, I plant a tree in the courtyard of Silent Strength Initiative's headquarters. It's a coast redwood, a tree that will grow tall and strong and provide shelter for others. I don't dedicate it to Margaret's memory. I dedicate it to all the women Margaret harmed through her fraud, all the women who should have been helped by the foundation she pillaged, all the women I now help through Silent Strength. I write in my journal that evening, Margaret is gone. The woman who spent her entire life trying to control everything lost her final battle to death. But the work continues. Eleanor grows. Vanessa heals. The women at Silent Strength build their independence. The tree I planted today will grow for centuries, providing shelter long after I'm gone. That's the inheritance that matters. Not the money, not the properties, not the empire Margaret tried to build through fraud. The inheritance that matters is the healing that emerges from broken places. The inheritance that matters is freedom. 2 days later, the federal prison sends Margaret's personal effects, a few books, some clothing, the letters I never sent her. I go through them briefly, then donate everything to a prison library program. I keep nothing of hers. I need nothing of hers. On day 575, as I'm sitting in my office at the foundation reviewing applications from women seeking our services, my phone rings. The caller identifies herself as Dr. Amara Okonkwo from the United Nations Women's Initiative. Her voice carries urgency and excitement. Rachel, I'm calling with an update about the summit, she says. We've had overwhelming response to your keynote invitation. In just the past 2 weeks, we've received over 100,000 registrations from women worldwide who specifically indicated they're attending because of you. Women are reaching out saying your story gave them hope. They want to hear you speak. They want to know how you transformed family trauma into community healing. Are you ready for this? Are you prepared to stand on a global platform and tell the world your story? I think about my grandfather. I think about my father. I think about Eleanor growing up knowing her family's truth. I think about the women planting trees in their own lives, breaking cycles, claiming independence. Yes, I tell Dr. Okonkwo. I'm ready. I've been ready. 160 days to prepare. That's enough time. The United Nations Auditorium in New York is unlike anything I've ever experienced. The space itself is cavernous, designed for important moments, designed for voices that need to carry across continents and languages. The audience fills every seat, over 1,000 women, and the faces I see represent every continent, every age, every socioeconomic background imaginable. Behind me, the translation equipment ensures that my words will be simultaneously delivered in 15 languages. The weight of that responsibility settles on my shoulders as I walk to the center of the stage. I'm 40 years old today, 2 years removed from my grandfather's will reading. 2 years of uncovering truth, confronting my mother, establishing a foundation, healing my relationship with my sister, building community with women I never would have known otherwise. 2 years of transformation. And now I'm standing on the most visible platform of my life, about to tell my family's story to the world. I take a breath, and I begin without notes, without prepared remarks, just with the accumulated wisdom of everything I've lived through. I stand before you as a woman who inherited pain. I inherited silence. I inherited a family legacy built on lies and control and psychological manipulation. My mother built an empire of fraud spanning decades. My father died in despair because he was caught between impossible choices. My grandfather spent 30 years building a hidden inheritance specifically to protect me from my mother's reach. This is my inheritance. And I stand here today to tell you that from this inheritance of pain, I chose to inherit something different. I chose to inherit strength. I chose to inherit freedom, and I chose to use that freedom to help other women claim theirs. I pause, letting the translations catch up, watching the faces in the audience, as understanding dawns across language barriers. My mother's crimes were financial in nature, but they were also deeply personal. She systematically stole from a charitable foundation meant to help vulnerable women. But more than that, she systematically stole autonomy from every person around her. She told my father he couldn't be honest. She told my sister she was complicit in crimes. She told me I was worthless. She built systems of control so sophisticated and so normalized that many people didn't even recognize them as abuse. I see women in the audience nodding. I see recognition in their faces. Financial abuse is not recognized the way physical abuse is recognized. Financial abuse doesn't leave bruises. It leaves psychological scars. It leaves women dependent. It leaves women powerless. It leaves women believing they're incapable of managing their own money, their own lives, their own choices. And because it's not recognized as abuse, it persists. It continues generation after generation. Mothers teach daughters that they can't understand finances. Husbands convince wives that they're too emotional to manage investments. Adult children convince aging parents that they need protection from financial predators. The mechanism changes, but the pattern remains the same: control through financial dependence. I walk slowly across the stage, making eye contact with women in different sections of the auditorium. I want to name this clearly: financial abuse is violence. It's rarely prosecuted as violence. It's rarely recognized as violence. But it destroys women's agency and autonomy just as surely as physical violence does. It prevents women from leaving dangerous situations. It prevents women from building independent lives. It prevents women from choosing their own futures. We need to recognize this. We need to name this. We need to prosecute this. We need to prevent this. The auditorium is completely silent. I can see women taking notes. I can see women crying quietly, recognizing their own situations in my words. My grandfather understood something that took me years to understand. He understood that the only inheritance that truly matters is freedom. Freedom to choose. Freedom to learn. Freedom to make mistakes and recover from them. Freedom to build your own life on your own terms. He spent 30 years building the financial infrastructure that would eventually give me that freedom. And when I finally claimed that freedom, I realized I needed to help other women claim theirs. I describe Silent Strength Initiative. I describe the women we serve. I describe Dorothy, who spent 40 years thinking she was stupid about money and discovered she was simply controlled. I describe Susan, who escaped a 42-year marriage and built independence at 58 years old. I describe Margaret, who reclaimed her own finances from her adult son and transformed their relationship from control-based to respect-based. These women aren't exceptional, I say. They're ordinary women who discovered that they're capable of extraordinary things when given education support and permission to claim their autonomy. And every single woman in this auditorium has the capacity to do what these women did. Every single woman has the capacity to claim financial independence. Every single woman has the capacity to teach her daughters and granddaughters and nieces that they deserve freedom. I move toward the closing of my remarks, and I feel the energy in the auditorium shift. People are leaning forward. People are ready to hear something they can carry forward. I inherited money from my grandfather. I inherited property. I inherited access to resources that most people never have. But the real inheritance, the only inheritance that mattered, was his understanding that freedom is worth more than any amount of wealth. My father couldn't claim that inheritance because my mother's threats trapped him. My mother rejected that inheritance and instead built systems of control. But I claimed it, and I'm asking each of you, what will you inherit? What will you pass forward to the next generation? I let that question sit, let it breathe in the space between us. Will you inherit silence? Will you continue the cycles that have trapped women for generations? Or will you inherit courage? Will you have the courage to learn about finances to teach other women to help those who are trapped by financial control break free? Because freedom is not a luxury. Freedom is not something reserved for wealthy people or educated people or privileged people. Freedom is a human right, and every woman deserves the opportunity to claim it. I stand quietly for a moment and then I deliver my final statement. I urge you claim your financial independence. Teach your daughters financial literacy from childhood. Help other women break free from financial control. Create systems in your families and communities that prevent financial abuse. Build the world you want to see. Build the inheritance you want to pass forward. Because the greatest gift we can give the next generation is not money or property. It's freedom. It's the knowledge that they belong to themselves. It's the understanding that their lives are theirs to build. Thank you. The silence extends for perhaps 2 seconds, and then the auditorium erupts. Women stand. The ovation begins, and it doesn't stop. 5 minutes. 6 minutes. Women from every continent are standing, clapping, crying, embracing each other. I see women who don't speak the same language connecting through the universal language of recognition, of finally being seen, of finally having their experience named and validated. I stand on that stage watching this response, and I think about my grandfather. I think about my father. I think about my mother sitting in prison, about Eleanor growing up knowing the truth about all the women building their independence through Silent Strength Initiative. Within hours, video of my speech is circulating on social media. The hashtag Silent Strength Initiative begins trending globally. Women from around the world are sharing their own stories of financial control, tagging the hashtag, creating a movement that extends far beyond my personal narrative. By the end of the first day, the video has been viewed 50 million times. The partnership inquiries begin arriving within 48 hours of my UN speech. Organizations from across the globe are reaching out, each one recognizing in my story something universal, something that transcends geography and culture and language. Women's Economic Justice from Poland, Sisters United from Nigeria, Voice for Women from Spain, Financial Freedom Coalition from India, Silent Sisters from Australia. Each organization operates within their own cultural context, serving their own communities, but each one sees in Silent Strength Initiative a model that could be adapted and localized for their specific needs. Caleb and I spend the following weeks in intensive communication with these organizations, understanding their structures, their challenges, their specific approaches to addressing financial abuse in their communities. What becomes clear immediately is that while the core problem, financial control as a mechanism of abuse, is universal, the manifestations are deeply contextualized by local culture, economic systems, and legal frameworks. In Poland, women's economic independence is constrained by different legal structures than in California. In Nigeria, the intersection of financial abuse with polygamy and inheritance law creates unique challenges. In India, dowry systems create their own particular form of financial control. In Spain and Australia, the dynamics differ again based on different historical and cultural foundations. What Rachel cannot do, what would be inappropriate and ultimately harmful, is to impose an American model on these different contexts. Instead, we develop a partnership framework based on principles rather than prescription. We commit to sharing our frameworks, our educational materials, our legal strategies, our psychological approaches. We commit to providing training and mentorship, but we explicitly do not dictate how these principles should be implemented in different cultural contexts. We trust the local leaders, the women who understand their own communities intimately, to adapt our work in ways that make sense for their specific situations. On day 725, I begin traveling to partner countries. First is Madrid, where I spend a week with Women's Economic Justice, working with Spanish women who have escaped controlling marriages. I listen to their stories. I hear about women who were married in their 20s and spent 40 years believing their husbands controlled finances because that was simply how marriage worked. I hear about the moment of realization when these women understood that control was not inevitable, that independence was possible, that they deserved to own their own money. One woman, Carmen, who is 63, tells me, "I spent 41 years married to a man who managed every peso. When I finally left him, I realized I didn't know how to open a bank account. I didn't know what credit was. I didn't know how to pay bills. I felt like a child. But through this program, I learned. Now I teach my daughter and my granddaughter, you will own your own money. You will understand your finances. You will never depend on anyone for your survival." In Warsaw on day 732, I speak to 300 women about recognizing financial abuse patterns that often masquerade as protection. I describe how my mother presented her control as necessary business management. I describe how these patterns show up in relationships where women are told they're too emotional to handle finances, where women are prevented from working, where women are kept deliberately ignorant about family assets. Polish women nod in recognition. They share their own stories of having money withheld, of having to ask permission to spend on necessities, of being told they couldn't possibly understand complex financial matters. Mumbai on day 738 brings different complexities. Financial abuse in India is often intertwined with dowry systems, with inheritance law that disadvantages women, with cultural expectations that daughters are financial burdens on families. I meet with Financial Freedom Coalition and hear stories of women who were considered worthless because they couldn't bring sufficient dowry into marriage. I meet a young woman named Priya who tells me, "I see you, strong woman who refused to be defined by her family. I want that for myself. I want to build my own life instead of waiting for a man to define me." By day 745, Caleb and I have formalized the international expansion structure. We establish an international board for Silent Strength initiative that includes leaders from each partner country. We commit $25 million annually to international programs funded by the $100 million Absolution Fund that my grandfather mysteriously left hidden in his final arrangements. We hire an international director of partnerships and a cultural liaison team that ensures we're respecting local contexts while maintaining core principles. We create a global financial literacy curriculum that can be adapted to different cultural and economic systems. We establish legal clinic networks across partner countries, connecting women with attorneys who understand both financial abuse and local legal frameworks. We train facilitators from each country to lead support groups, recognizing that women are often more comfortable sharing vulnerable information with people from their own cultural backgrounds. The expansion is rapid but intentional. By day 750, Silent Strength Initiative operates in 15 countries across 4 continents. We've served over 5,000 women in our first expansion year. We have over 10,000 women on waiting lists globally, all seeking access to financial literacy education and support in breaking free from financial control. Sydney on day 748 is my final destination before returning to California. I meet with Silent Sisters and spend time with rural Australian women who feel isolated by geography and by the specific dynamics of control in agricultural communities. One woman tells me, "I thought I was alone in my shame. I thought that being controlled by my husband about money was just how farm life worked. But hearing your story, I realize the shame isn't on me. The shame is on the system that allowed him to control me, and now I understand I can break free." The calls and emails increase exponentially as my travel continues. Women worldwide are sharing their stories using the hashtag #SilentStrengthInitiative. Organizations are forming locally, adapting our model for their own communities. Universities are requesting me as a speaker. Foundations are asking about partnership funding opportunities. The movement that began with my personal healing is now transforming into a global force for women's financial independence. On day 755, my phone rings, and the caller identifies herself as Rebecca Morrison from Morrison Literary Agency. Her voice is excited and professional. "Rachel, I've been following your work since your UN speech," Rebecca says. "Your story is changing how women worldwide think about family, money power, and independence. We represent several major publishers who are interested in your memoir. We believe your story could reach millions of readers. We think you need to write this book. We think the world needs to read it." I'm quiet for a moment, processing what she's asking. My life has already been documented in news coverage and social media in the viral videos of my UN speech. But a memoir would be different. A memoir would be the full story told in my voice with all the complexity and nuance that news coverage can never capture. "When should I start?" I ask. "As soon as possible." Rebecca responds, "We're looking at publication within 18 months. Are you ready to write your story?" I think about my grandfather. I think about my father. I think about Eleanor growing up knowing her family's truth. I think about all the women building their independence, all the women breaking cycles, all the women claiming freedom for themselves and their daughters. "I'm ready," I tell Rebecca. "I've been ready. Let's write this story." Writing the memoir becomes the most emotionally demanding project I've ever undertaken. I begin on day 760 in my apartment in Oakland, surrounded by documents, journals, recordings of interviews I've done with Caleb and Alvarez and Vanessa about our investigation into my mother's crimes. Rebecca Morrison recommended I work with a ghostwriter, but I refused. This story needs to come from my voice in my words, with my specific perspective on events that defined my life. The first months are the hardest. I force myself to relive the will reading, to remember the humiliation, to access the emotions I was suppressing in that moment. I describe my mother's face, her smirk, the way she laughed at my public rejection. I write about my father's death with the complexity it deserves, not as simple suicide, but as an impossible situation that destroyed a man caught between protecting truth and protecting his daughter. I write about my grandfather's video message, about the emotional impact of hearing his voice reach across decades to guide me. What becomes clear as I write is that I need to describe patterns rather than sensationalize incidents. I could detail every cruel thing my mother said, every manipulative tactic she employed, every way she weaponized her control. But that would turn the memoir into a revenge narrative, and that's not what this story is. This story is about recognizing patterns of abuse, understanding how they operate, and breaking free from them. So, I describe my mother's behavior in terms of its impact, rather than focusing on individual incidents designed to shock readers. The most difficult section to write is about my father's death. I spend 3 weeks on those pages, rewriting them repeatedly. The autopsy report gives me ambiguity. Tom might have deliberately overdosed, might have accidentally mixed medications, might have been somewhere in between. Rather than choosing one narrative and presenting it as truth, I decide to honor the ambiguity. Some truths can't be known. I write. Some truths can only be survived. My father died because my mother created an impossible situation. Whether his death was deliberate or accidental matters less than understanding that my mother's psychological abuse created the conditions where my father saw no escape. I write about discovering Unit 7 with the wonder and shock I actually felt. I write about Caleb with honesty, about how his personal vendetta and professional expertise combined to create powerful investigation. I write about my sister's journey from complicity to courage. I write about the moment I decided not to use the recording of my mother's confession, explaining that restraint itself became my power. The writing process takes 5 months. By day 850, I have a complete manuscript. I send it to Rebecca, and she spends 2 weeks reading it. When she calls me back, her voice carries emotion I wasn't expecting. "Rachel, this is extraordinary," she says. "This isn't just your story. This is a manifesto about financial abuse, about generational trauma, about the possibility of breaking cycles. This is going to change how people understand family dynamics and financial control. This is going to help so many women." Penguin Books publishes Silent Strength: How I Inherit Freedom on day 780. The initial print run is 50,000 copies. Within the first week, every copy sells. By day 785, the book has sold 100,000 copies and reaches number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list, surpassed only by a celebrity cookbook. The audio version is downloaded 50,000 times in the first 2 weeks. Publishers in 12 countries immediately request translation rights. Media coverage of the memoir emphasizes not just the personal drama, but the broader cultural significance. Articles frame my story as cultural commentary on how women are systematically controlled through financial means. Book clubs form across the country specifically to discuss the memoir. Therapy clients request it from their therapists as recommended reading. Universities begin adding it to women's studies and business ethics curricula. What moves me most is how women respond by sharing their own stories. An Instagram account dedicated to the hashtag #SilentStrength. Initiative becomes a platform for hundreds of women telling their own narratives of financial abuse. Women share stories of being prevented from working, of having money withheld, of discovering hidden accounts, of realizing they'd been controlled their entire lives. The comments section becomes a space of collective recognition and healing. A woman named Patricia posts, "I spent 53 years in a marriage where my husband controlled every penny. I read Rachel's memoir and I finally understood I wasn't stupid. I was controlled. Now I'm 72 years old, divorced, and building my own life. Rachel Morgan gave me permission to leave." Another woman, Jasmine, writes, "My father controlled my finances into my 30s. I thought this was normal. I thought all parents did this. Reading Rachel's story, I realized I'd been abused. I'm now taking steps to separate my finances from my father's control. Thank you for giving me language for what happened to me." Media outlets begin publishing stories about the memoir's cultural impact. Women magazine runs a feature titled, "Rachel Morgan showed us that truth-telling about family dysfunction isn't betrayal, it's liberation." The New York Times publishes an op-ed arguing that the memoir should be required reading in high schools because it teaches young people about recognizing controlling behavior before it becomes entrenched in their adult relationships. The memoir becomes catalyst for broader cultural conversation about financial abuse. Speaking requests multiply. Universities want me to teach seminars. Organizations ask me to consult on curriculum development. Publishers offer substantial advances for follow-up books exploring specific aspects of financial abuse, intergenerational trauma, or women's economic empowerment. But what matters most to me comes on day 785 when I receive an email from Vanessa. The subject line reads, "You did it. You honored Dad and Grandpa Henry. You broke the cycle. Now I can raise my daughter in the light instead of the shadows." I open the attachment and I see a photograph taken at the lake cabin. It shows 3 generations of Morgan women. There's me, 40 years old, standing behind my sister Vanessa, who's holding her daughter Eleanor, now 18 months old. We're smiling at the camera with the ease of people who have learned to be honest with each other, who have moved beyond the dysfunction that defined our family history. Eleanor is looking at the camera with the unself-conscious joy of a toddler. She has no idea yet about her family history, about the grandmother in prison, about the great-grandfather who died in despair, about the great-great-grandfather who built a 30-year plan to protect his family. But she will know. When she's old enough to understand, her mother and her aunt will tell her the truth, aged appropriately, framed not as shame, but as understanding about how to recognize control and break free from it. I stare at this photograph for a long time, and I understand that this image represents everything my grandfather intended when he built his inheritance for me. This is what freedom looks like across generations. This is what healing looks like. This is what it means to break cycles. I begin writing on day 760, and the process is more emotionally demanding than I anticipated. Rebecca had warned me that memoir writing would require reliving trauma, but understanding something intellectually and experiencing it viscerally are entirely different things. I sit at my desk and force myself to write about moments I've spent years trying to distance myself from. I write about discovering Unit 7. I write about my mother's phone calls. I write about the cabin confrontation. I write about my father's death and the ambiguity that will never fully resolve. The memoir is titled Silent Strength: How I Inherit Freedom, and it's structured around the central metaphor of inheritance. What do we inherit from our families? What do we choose to keep and what do we choose to release? How do we transform inherited pain into inherited purpose? I struggle most intensely with how to write about my mother. The easy path would be to sensationalize her crimes, to paint her as a cartoonish villain, to use her as a cautionary tale. But that wouldn't be honest. Margaret is human. She's broken and terrified and operating from wounds she never addressed. So instead of detailing every fraud or every manipulation, I focus on patterns. I describe how control operates, how fear becomes justification, how a person can harm others while believing they're protecting them. I paint a portrait of a human being rather than a monster, which somehow makes the harm she caused even more comprehensible and preventable. I struggle equally with how to honor my father without romanticizing his death. I describe his impossible situation without suggesting he made the right choice or the wrong choice. I leave the ambiguity intentional. Some truths can't be known, I write in the memoir. Some truths can only be survived. My father's death is one of those truths. Whether it was deliberate or accidental, the result is the same. He's gone, and I'm learning to live with the not knowing. By day 775, I've completed the manuscript. It's over 400 pages of my life, my family's history, my journey from victim to survivor to advocate. I submit it to Penguin Books, and they schedule publication for day 780. The book releases on a Tuesday morning, and the response is immediate and overwhelming. Women are buying it in quantities that exceed the publisher's projections. By day 785, Silent Strength has sold 100,000 copies. It reaches number 2 on the bestseller list, sitting just below a celebrity cookbook. The audio version is downloaded 50,000 times within the first week. International translation rights are being purchased by publishers in 12 countries before the book has even been out for a week. Media coverage emphasizes that this isn't just family drama or revenge narrative. This is cultural commentary on how women are systematically controlled through financial means. Journalists connect my story to broader systemic issues: the gender pay gap, the pink tax, women's lack of financial literacy education, the ways that wealth is weaponized within families and relationships. Book clubs form immediately. Women begin gathering to read and discuss the memoir together. Therapists start requesting copies to use with their clients dealing with financial abuse trauma. Universities add Silent Strength to women's studies curricula. The memoir becomes more than a personal narrative, it becomes a tool for consciousness raising and education. But what moves me most is when women begin sharing their own stories publicly, using the hashtag #SilentStrength. Initiative women across social media platforms start telling their stories of financial control and abuse. An Instagram account dedicated to women's financial abuse narratives grows to over 2 million followers within weeks. Each post is a woman's truth, a woman's experience, a woman's journey from control to independence. Some stories are short and raw. Others are longer narratives spanning decades of hidden abuse. Major media outlets begin reporting on the phenomenon. Rachel Morgan's memoir sparked global conversation about financial abuse. Headlines proclaim. Women magazine publishes a feature titled, "Rachel Morgan showed us that truth-telling about family dysfunction isn't betrayal, it's liberation." The memoir becomes a cultural moment, a catalyst for the broader reckoning with how wealth and control intersect within families. On day 790, I receive an email from Vanessa. The subject line reads, "You did it. You honored Dad and Grandpa Henry. You broke the cycle. Now I can raise my daughter in the light, instead of the shadows." Attached is a photograph taken at the lake cabin. The image shows 3 generations of Morgan women, me, Vanessa, and Eleanor, who is now 2 years old. We're standing together on the deck where my grandfather taught me to fish decades ago. We're smiling, we're holding each other. We're alive and free and unbroken by the cycles that trapped the generations before us. I stare at that photograph for a long time, and I understand finally what my grandfather's true inheritance really was. Not money or property or business holdings. Freedom. He gave me freedom. And now Vanessa and I are giving it to Eleanor. I returned to the lake cabin on day 800, exactly 3 years after my first visit following the will reading. The cabin is different now, it's my home. I've renovated it carefully, respecting the bones of the structure while making it livable and warm. The furniture is comfortable. The kitchen is modern. But I've kept the essential character of the place intact, kept it as a space where thinking happens, where truth surfaces, where my grandfather's legacy continues to unfold. I stand in the living room where I first watched my grandfather's video message, and I feel the accumulated weight of these 3 years settle into my bones. I'm no longer the frightened woman who arrived here seeking answers about a mysterious inheritance. I'm no longer the angry investigator uncovering her mother's crimes. I'm no longer the traumatized daughter processing her father's death, or the victim seeking justice. I'm all of those people and none of them simultaneously. I've integrated these aspects of myself into a coherent whole. I write in my journal that evening, 3 years ago I walked into this cabin not knowing who I was beyond my family's dysfunction. I thought I was defined by my mother's rejection, by my father's death, by my grandfather's hidden inheritance. But I understand now that none of those external circumstances define me. What defines me is what I chose to do with those circumstances. I inherited money, but money wasn't the inheritance. I inherited pain, but the pain taught me compassion. I inherited silence, but I broke the silence. I inherited my grandfather's courage and my father's love and my mother's warning about what happens when fear becomes master of a life. I inherited all of it, and I transformed it into something that serves instead of destroys. The Silent Strength Initiative has grown beyond anything I initially imagined. We now operate in 15 countries across 4 continents. We've served over 15,000 women in the first 3 years. We have dedicated staff in each location, each one trained in our methodology, but also empowered to adapt our work to their specific cultural contexts. The foundation has become more than my personal project. It's become a movement with its own momentum, its own leadership structure, its own capacity to continue and grow regardless of my individual involvement. Vanessa has fully integrated into foundation leadership as Director of Community Programs and Intergenerational Healing. She brings something invaluable to this work, the perspective of someone who was complicit in family dysfunction, who recognized her own complicity, and who chose accountability and healing. Women see Vanessa and recognize themselves in her journey of redemption. Eleanor, now 3 years old, is growing up with explicit financial literacy instruction, with age-appropriate understanding of her family's history, with the knowledge that her family's story includes pain, but also includes courage and transformation. Caleb has become an indispensable partner and mentor to emerging financial advocates around the world. He's developed training programs that teach other accountants and financial professionals how to recognize and address financial abuse. He's become a bridge between technical financial expertise and emotional understanding of how financial control operates psychologically. Alvarez, now fully retired, remains connected to the foundation as advisor and family friend. He meets with me monthly at the lake cabin, and we sit on the deck overlooking the water and talk about the work, about his own journey from complicity to accountability, about the privilege of witnessing generational healing unfold. I have speaking engagements booked through the next 2 years. Universities want me to teach courses on financial abuse prevention. Women's organizations want me to consult on their programs. Foundations want to partner with Silent Strength Initiative. The memoir continues to sell and inspire. What strikes me most is that none of this external success or visibility changes my fundamental internal state. I'm at peace not because everything is resolved, but because I've resolved how to live with complexity, ambiguity, and human imperfection. I finally understand what my grandfather meant when he said that inheritance isn't about money. I inherited Tom's lesson that love sometimes means making sacrifices, sometimes means choosing to protect others even when it costs you everything. I inherited Henry's lesson that planning with intention and patience creates possibilities that 30-year plans can bear fruit decades later, that planting seeds matters even when you won't see the harvest. I inherited Margaret's lesson that control and fear destroy more than they protect, That accumulating power through manipulation leaves you ultimately powerless, that the systems we build to protect ourselves often become prisons. I inherited freedom not given to me, but claimed by me, fought for by me, earned through courage and truth-telling. And most importantly, I inherited responsibility to pass forward what I've learned, that women deserve economic independence as a fundamental human right. That silence enables abuse and truth-telling breaks cycles. That healing is possible regardless of age or circumstance. That the greatest inheritance we can offer the next generation is freedom to author their own stories. My phone rings on day 825, and it's Dr. Amara Okonkwo from the United Nations Women's Initiative. Her voice is warm and excited. "Rachel, we're planning next year's Women's Summit, and we want to do something different this time," she says. "Instead of just having you speak again, we want you to introduce the new generation of women leaders trained through Silent Strength Initiative partnerships worldwide. We want the world to see that this isn't just your story anymore, it's a global movement. Will you do it?" When I hang up the phone, I walk over to the windowsill where the brass key still sits, the key that started this entire journey. I pick it up, turn it over in my palm, and I smile. "It was never about the key," I say aloud to the empty room. "It was always about what the key represented: freedom to unlock your own story." By day 850, Silent Strength Initiative has achieved an institutional permanence that extends far beyond my personal involvement or even my lifetime. We've secured permanent headquarters in a beautiful building in downtown San Francisco, with satellite offices established across 15 countries. The organization now employs over 200 staff members, operates with an annual budget of $50 million, and maintains a board of directors that includes leaders from partner countries around the world. Most significantly, we've established a permanent endowment using the remaining Morgan family assets, ensuring that the organization will continue indefinitely, regardless of funding fluctuations or my direct involvement. The work has moved beyond individual service provision into systemic change. We've developed policy recommendations that are being seriously considered by state legislatures about recognizing financial abuse as a criminal offense, distinct from general fraud. Our model of financial literacy education has been adopted by over 100 organizations globally, each adapting our frameworks to their specific contexts. Universities are incorporating our materials into their curricula. Law schools are using our case studies in training future attorneys. Business schools are teaching about financial abuse as an aspect of organizational ethics and corporate responsibility. On day 860, UC Berkeley officially announces the establishment of the Rachel Morgan Institute for Financial Abuse Prevention and Recovery. It's a dedicated research center with multidisciplinary faculty from economics, psychology, sociology, and law departments. Researchers are studying the causes and patterns of financial control in intimate and family relationships, examining how these patterns persist across generations, analyzing the effectiveness of different intervention and prevention strategies. The Institute has already published preliminary research showing strong correlations between financial literacy education and women's economic independence outcomes. My story, once a private family tragedy, has become a case study taught in business schools, law schools, social work programs, and psychology departments. Professors use my memoir as a primary text in courses about ethics, about family systems, about generational trauma. Students read about my experience and recognize patterns in their own families. They begin asking different questions about how wealth operates within families, about how financial control operates psychologically, about what accountability looks like when family members cause harm. But what moves me most deeply is the leadership pipeline that Silent Strength Initiative has established. On day 865, I meet with the cohort of young women selected for our inaugural leadership program. These are women aged 25 to 40 who have experienced financial abuse, who have recovered, who want to dedicate their professional lives to helping other women break free from financial control. I become their mentor, helping them develop their leadership skills, coaching them through the challenges of this work, preparing them to eventually take over leadership of Silent Strength Initiative and expand its mission in directions I cannot anticipate. One woman in the cohort, Maria from Madrid, tells me, "I was trapped by my father for 30 years. He controlled everything. I thought I would never be free. But through your foundation, I learned that independence was possible. Now I want to give other women what was given to me, the tools and the courage to claim their own lives." Another Amara from Lagos shares, "Your story gave me permission to tell my own. I was being controlled by my husband through financial manipulation, and I thought it was normal. Reading your memoir, I realized it wasn't normal. It was abuse. I left him. I reclaimed my life. And now I want to help other women do the same. I understand that my greatest legacy isn't my own accomplishments or even the Silent Strength initiative itself. My greatest legacy is the leaders I help develop, the movements I inspire, the systems I help build that will continue transforming lives long after I'm gone. These young women will take what I've learned and expand it in ways I cannot imagine. They'll adapt it to contexts I haven't considered. They'll bring innovations I wouldn't have conceived of. They'll become the future of this work in ways that exceed anything I could accomplish alone. On day 900, I receive an email from the director of Stanford University's Special Collections Archive. The message is formal but carries significant weight. The director is requesting to accept donation of my family's documents, not just my memoir, but also my father's letters, my grandfather's journals, and business records, Margaret's correspondence. They want to preserve our family story as a primary historical document about family wealth, financial abuse, and generational trauma in America. I sit with this request for a long time. The story that once felt like shameful secret. The dysfunction I spent years trying to hide from the world is now being recognized as having historical and academic significance. Our family's pain is becoming part of the historical record about how systems of control operate and how individuals can resist them. I agree to the donation. I gather my father's letters that I've kept safe all these years. I collect my grandfather's journals and business records. I compile my own documentation of this journey. I prepare everything for transfer to Stanford, understanding that future generations will study our story not as personal melodrama, but as historical evidence about patterns of family control, generational trauma, and the possibility of healing. When I hand over the boxes containing my family's complete story to the Stanford archivists, I feel a strange sense of peace. Our secrets are no longer secrets. Our shame is no longer hidden. Our story belongs now to history, to scholarship, to the world. And in that surrender of privacy, in that transformation of personal tragedy into public documentation, I understand that my grandfather was right all along. The greatest inheritance isn't wealth or property or power. The greatest inheritance is truth. The greatest inheritance is freedom. And the greatest gift we can offer the world is our honest story about how we survived, how we healed, and how we transformed inherited pain into inherited strength. I am 42 years old, sitting at the lake cabin on day 1000, exactly 5 years after my grandfather's will reading. The journals are spread around me on the desk, my personal journals, my father's letters that I've carefully preserved, my grandfather's business records and philosophical musings. I'm writing the final pages of my own journal, the concluding chapter of a story that began with humiliation and transformed into healing. I reflect on the woman I was 5 years ago. She was frightened, angry, isolated. She believed she was worthless because her own family treated her that way. She carried decades of resentment toward a father she thought had abandoned her. She was trapped in a narrative that wasn't hers to tell. But I'm no longer that woman. I'm purposeful now. I'm connected to people and communities in ways that sustain me. I'm engaged in work that matters deeply. I'm not heroic or perfect. I still struggle with my mother's memory. I still feel moments of grief for the father I barely knew. I still process the weight of my grandfather's sacrifices. But I've learned to carry these complex emotions without being crushed by them. I've learned that healing isn't about resolving everything or achieving perfect peace. Healing is about integrating all the parts of ourselves, the broken parts, the strong parts, the confused parts, into something coherent that allows us to move forward. I write in my journal, I thought inheritance was about receiving, but I learned it's about choosing. Every single day, I choose which parts of my family's legacy I carry forward and which parts I release. I choose to carry forward Tom's love, Henry's intention, and the hardest lesson of all, Margaret's reminder that fear masked as control destroys everything it touches. Vanessa arrives at the cabin on this evening of day 1000, and with her comes Caleb and Alvarez. We've established a monthly ritual of gathering here, the four of us, to discuss the Foundation's work and simply to be together. These are no longer relationships bound by family obligation or professional necessity. These are relationships built on genuine connection and shared purpose. Vanessa is my business partner and my sister in truth. Caleb is my trusted advisor and my friend. Alvarez, now in his 80s, is my mentor and the keeper of family secrets who has chosen to spend his final years helping heal the very family he once enabled to be broken. We sit on the deck overlooking the lake as the sun sets, and there is no pretense between us. We don't perform for each other. We don't hide. We simply exist together, four people who have seen each other at our worst moments and chosen to remain present anyway. That's what genuine connection looks like. On the final pages of my journal, I write about what I've finally come to understand about freedom. Freedom is a revolutionary act. My family tried to control me through money, through secrets, through shame. Breaking free, claiming financial independence, speaking truth, building community with other women, that is revolutionary. My grandfather understood this. That's why he spent 30 years building a system to give me freedom. My father understood this. That's why he died rather than live in lies. I understand this now. That's why I spend my life helping other women claim their own freedom. And Eleanor? I pause thinking about Vanessa's daughter growing up with truth and autonomy. She will understand this too. She will grow up knowing freedom is not a luxury. Freedom is not something reserved for the privileged or the educated. Freedom is a human right. Freedom is the inheritance we claim for ourselves and pass forward to others. I take the brass key from the windowsill where it sat for 5 years. I hold it in my palm, feeling its weight, understanding that this simple object opened not just a locked office, but an entire world of possibility. I've decided to donate it to Stanford University Archives, where it will be displayed alongside my journals and my family's documents. A curator will create a placard, the key that unlocked everything Rachel Morgan's path from victim to voice. But I write one final note to accompany it. This key unlocked my family's secrets. But the real key to freedom isn't made of brass. It's made of courage. The courage to speak truth, to claim independence, to help others do the same. May whoever reads this know your own key is already inside you. You just have to be brave enough to use it. I sign it with my name and the date, Rachel Morgan, 2027. I place the key in its protective case and seal the note alongside it. And I understand finally that this is not an ending. This is a beginning. This is the moment where my personal story transforms into something larger, something that belongs to history and to the future, and to every woman who will read these words and recognize herself in my journey and find the courage to claim her own freedom. Rachel Morgan's story is living proof that when we find the courage to speak truth, when we refuse to stay silent in the face of control, we don't just liberate ourselves, we inspire millions of others to do the same. From a woman deceived by her own family for 30 years to a global voice for women's financial freedom and independence. Rachel's journey demonstrates that the real inheritance we leave for future generations isn't money, it's freedom. If Rachel Morgan's story has touched your heart, if you see yourself in her journey, then subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories of women overcoming similar struggles. Leave a comment below this video. What resonated with you in Rachel's story? Which moment of her transformation impacted you most? Share your thoughts because every comment is another voice speaking up for change. That's why we need to hear from each other. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And together we're building the world where freedom isn't a privilege, it's a human right that every woman claims for herself.